Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the Luffy Fanfics, back with the amazing fanfiction. This is the second part of What If Luffy Faked Death Using Vegapunk's Time Machine. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Any concerns Nami had over getting multiple pirate crews with different ships to follow the same route with anything approaching formation were viciously vindicated within 24 hours of leaving Gecko Island. She could count on one hand how many of her new nakama could properly read a compass, including herself, and have fingers left over. Mary, being the free spirit she was constantly pulling ahead of the snail's pace that was the best the big top could manage. And the Bezin Black seemed cursed to hit every trick current it came across. Suffice to say the party atmosphere of setting out with a new crew didn't last long. The next 3 days were a nightmare of rigging drills, crash courses in the stuff Nami had already known when she was shorter than Bellamir's knee, and pounding the idea of coordination into lazy, chaotic idiots she was now forced to call her crewmates. Luckily, Garp had included fleet maneuvers into Luffy's tutelage. Between his cheerful if unyielding instruction, Nami's zero-tolerance discipline, and Kaya's gentle encouragement, the members of the Straw Hat Armada had learned how to sail within a half knot of each other without running the risk of collision by the fourth day. Nami tuned out the sounds of Luffy's eager victims as she tended to her weather eggs. She'd claimed the spot that would eventually house her tangerine bushes and used the space to instead grow her arsenal. The beauty of Withuria's masterpieces were that they could be grown anywhere there was a stable climate. In the chaos of the Grand Line, that required floating above the clouds, out here in the East Blue, she needed nothing more than the normal season cycle. She mentally applauded her foresight in gathering the rare chemicals needed to start the process during her thieving runs. After a couple days, the groups of bubbles were barely the size of grapes and contained nothing but wisps, but in a little while they would contain the fully matured artificial storm clouds that made her an asset to the crew in a combat situation. How curious, Kaya spoke up, approaching her fellow female. Kaya had quickly found her niche in the crew as general conflict resolver. Years of training to run a business empire that spanned the East Blue translated well into keeping a ship running smoothly. She somehow managed to meld Robin's unflappable calm, Vivi's empathy, and Nami's bone-chilling intimidation. Zoro looked forward with glee to the day she matched wits with his nemesis. Sanji would be chewed up and spat out like a 3-day-old tea cookie. Needless to say, she had gained the admiration of many of Buggy's and Django's crew, whom regarded her in the same light they would an angel sent from heaven. However, as was loudly demonstrated every night, she was Usopp's girl. If the nightly soundtrack from a porno audible from all three ships weren't enough, any man that even looked at her too long found himself discouraged by either a shot from Usopp at a usually impossible angle to the head, or Kaya pulling her saber and holding the point to the pervert's danglies. These really are quite fascinating, Kaya continued, leaning forward to observe the balloon-like growths. She offered Nami a cup of fresh brewed coffee, imported from the finest plantation in West Blue. This was the one luxury she had been unwilling to compromise on when adapting to pirate life, and the crew of the Mary couldn't fault her after experiencing the world of difference between it and the standard instant crap they drank. Though Luffy had been banned for life from the beverage in its entirety after downing a whole pot and nearly capsizing all three ships in the ensuing caffeine rush, Nami gave a near-sexual groan as she seized the cup and downed the heavenly brew. I swear, this is the one reason I haven't scalped you yet. Kaya looked affronted. Oh come on, I'm not that bad. The navigator swiveled one bloodshot eye to regard her fellow goddess. After a day of trying to corral a mob of testosterone-fueled ignorami with single-digit IQs, all I ask is that I get to collapse into my cozy bed. Instead, I have to huddle in a cold, wooden bucket until the ear-splitting cries of the seemingly endless variations of harder, faster, more, and god fucking damn it, you're amazing taper off and I can attempt to breathe through the choking musk of sex while you're passed out like a baby on cough syrup. Kaya had the decency to blush. I see your point. Well, you could always bunk with Luffy and Zoro. It should be easy to set up a privacy screen. And hammocks are actually really comfy. Not a chance, Nami hissed. It was bad enough Usopp was constantly invading the sanctity of the girls' room. If she moved to the boys' cabin, the time-honored barriers between the fair and rough sexes would be forever broken. You failed to warn me that you're a freaking howler monkey or that Usopp was a marathon man when you offered the terms for your fortune. I'm honestly not sure it's worth it. Kaya's eyes narrowed. If I didn't know better, Nami-san, I'd say you were jealous. No, just offended. Nami snapped. Her sleep deprivation led to her saying the next lines aloud instead of mentally. Honestly, have you no feminine pride? Sex is our weapon against those brutes. It's the one edge we have over them, and you're just giving it away. Kaya frowned. She sensed she had unknowingly stumbled upon a deep-seated issue of her nakama. Sex isn't about power, Nami-san. I love Usopp, so I tend to his needs, and it brings me joy to do so. He does the same in return. It's part of our partnership. Well, yippee for you. But not all girls get the fairy tale ending. Some have to fight and claw with the wolves to get what they want and can't afford to be all noble when it comes to using what they have. Nami took a breath like she was trying to suck back in the words from the air. Forget I said that. Sorry, I'm really tired. Kaya smiled gently. She carefully kept all traces of pity out her voice, maintaining the insistent tone of a schoolmarm. Look, Nami-san, it's not my place to say this, and it probably won't do any good given our circumstances, but it would definitely do you a world of good to find a man that honors your body instead of using it and see things from the other side. Nami almost killed half her eggs as she cringed. Trying and failing to keep the bitterness from her voice, she demurred, well, not all of us are lucky enough to have the white knight in shining armor in walking distance. Where the hell is a pirate wench going to find a guy like that? The closest I've ever come in both timelines is Sanji. And he just plays the part because he wants in my pants. I don't know, Kaya said, turning away to survey the horizon. Not every man would brave a blizzard, the wrath of God, and an army of zombies for a woman that never gives anything in return. Luffy wound up having to drag his ass, so he was a hindrance more than a help on that first one. He was coming after the rest of the crew too on the second, and he had a bone to pick with my kidnapper on the last. Plus I wound up saving his ass at the last minute. Same way I had to bail him out when his stupid chivalry almost got him killed at a nice lobby. He's got that stupid damsel in distress complex going at all times. Plus he doesn't treat me any more specially than he does every single life form with a pulse and boobs he sees. Nami grumbled. Unknown to her, the frustration of possessiveness crept into her tone. Kaya hid her grin. Really, Nami could be as clueless as the men she claimed to hate. If you say so, she murmured with patent insincerity, already plotting. The heavy atmosphere brought on by the sacred dialogue of womankind was broken as Usopp led the final lap on the big top by breaking into a rousing chorus of Sojking's hero song. 2.5 weeks of Garp's tough love by proxy was already showing results. Buggy's crew already looked more intimidating. All the exposed skin now displaying noteworthy muscle, and the general idiotic attitudes of each member tempered by focus and determination. Luffy really brought out the best in people. Even Buggy had started training with his captain, adopting a if you can't beat them, join them attitude. He'd probably never reach the worshipful stance of his crew, but his lingering frustration and jealousy was swiftly being replaced with a jovial camaraderie. It was almost possible to see how Shanks could have liked him. Roo, rah, roo. All right, that's it, Usopp called, ending what to him was a light jog, but to his clown-themed Nakama was a sprint. Luffy hopped up on the masthead. Mary and Sunny were his favorite special seats. But there was a certain charm to the big top. Plus it made it easy for everyone to see and hear him. Good work, everybody. You keep working this hard. Then when you start eating Sanji's special meat, you'll be ready for the grand line in no time. Remember, you're all proud members of the Straw Hat Armada. When you fight well, you honor me, you honor yourselves, and you honor all your brothers and sisters. Now go get your grub. Dismissed. With a roar of manly celebration, the deck was emptied as the men charged for the galley and the showers, the latter a relatively new development, but Kaya and Nami had each insisted, and one defied one of them at their peril, let alone both. Buggy wiped his brow with a towel before setting about his rather unique morning ablutions. Rather than shower as a whole in the cramped confines of the big top's head, he preferred to wash sections of his body individually before setting them to spin so fast they air-dried in seconds. While his right thigh started to see to itself with a handy bucket, Buggy turned to Usopp. Once he got over the whole violent electrocution thing, the clown had found a kindred spirit in the sniper, what with the bravado and mad scientist thing. It was the first chance he'd ever had to really geek out with someone, and he very much enjoyed it. So, how are the designs on my new foot coming? You really think you can fit a pistol in it? You kidding? It's cake, Usopp waved off, conveniently forgetting to mention he was just copying what Buggy himself would do by the time he wound up and impelled down. I'm more concerned with your harnesses. I'm still working out how to make them stick if you split vertically instead of horizontally. But once I get the trick, you should have twice as many knives on you. And you really think we should make a whole line of Buggy balls? Look, Buggy, it's admirable that you added so much boom to the basic design. But there's so many different paths to take. A tiny tweak to the chemistry and you could make it silent so the Marines don't know what's coming. And then you could apply your process to grape shot, chain shot, flame shot, and don't get me started on the different kinds of poison we can play with. Luffy tuned it out once they started to get into multisyllabic jargon. He looked over to the Bezin Black to see Zoro leading drills. Since most of the Black Cat crew used some form of bladed weapon in keeping with the claw theme, Zoro had appointed himself the main trainer of that crew, with Luffy adding minimal drills. They'd had a crew meeting and decided it would be kind of stupid to have all their crews fight the same way. The Straw Hats were well-rounded, but the various other crews they would pick up would be best off specializing to help address the various scenarios they were likely to run into, since their journey would be much more an open war on the Marines given their numbers and the reputation they were bound to get when Zoro beat Mihawk. The buggy crew were designated infantry. With their general brute force approach and the sheer flashiness of their appearance, they would serve well at the front lines, distracting the enemy. The Black Cats were to be modeled after their former captain as an assassination supplementary force. They would stick the sidelines of a battle, sneaking in and out to deal surgical strikes before retreating to safety, like their namesake with a mouse. Robin was slotted to help Zoro the way Usopp helped Luffy. Zoro, not yet having the handy weights he acquired in Logtown, was focusing more on the mentality and fine details of wielding a blade. He found himself channeling Kishiro more than Mihawk. The calm old man had taught him more about what it was to be a swordsman than his obsession, though the latter had certainly known more about what to do with a sword. He finished the last of the drills and had his students get into lotus position. Remember, focus and intent are always more important than brute force. In a fight between a thug swinging a sword and an old man that can strike as easy as breathing, the old guy wins every time. A true swordsman has both strength and focus. If you can attain that, then you will be able to cut everything and nothing. So saying, Zoro turned and did a simple overhead strike with Wado. The Black Cats watched in awe as a trough appeared in the ocean, as if God had taken a knife and carved a line in the water. For a single instant, the image remained calm and frozen, and then the ocean exploded, sending froth up like blood along the path of Zoro's strike, going into the distance until a pillar of earth at the edge of their sight collapsed. Zoro calmly sheathed his blade and turned to face his gobsmacked Nakama. This is the power of a swordsman. Don't tarnish it, Luffy called out from the other side of Mary. Zoro, remember your friends that we're looking for. The Black Cats then witnessed the utter badass that was their sensei blush bright as a cherry and fidget like he wanted to disappear. Shit. Oops. Since Mary was the fastest, she pulled ahead to check if Johnny and Yosaku were still alive while the Bezin Black and Big Top followed belatedly behind. When the men got close, they were treated to the shocking sight of Kaya kneeling over a man that wasn't Usopp, her mouth covering his. Damn, lucky bastard, getting mouth to mouth from Kaya-sama, grumbled Siam. Can I drown too? Asked a random buggy pirate. Similar complaints continued until the men in question found themselves dancing to avoid the shots fired at their feet. When they looked for the culprit, they found the menacing sight of Usopp, his eyes promising death, his slingshot tapping against his thigh. That's my girlfriend, he growled, and the jealous suitors hid their faces to conceal their tears of sorrow. Of course, such a gem was already claimed by a macho beast they could never hope to best. It's really weird to see the guys you cowered at cowering at you. You've really come a long way, Zoro remarked to Usopp. The long-nosed man shrugged before blushing. Well, I can't claim all the credit. It's remarkable how much your confidence is boosted when you're getting consistently laid. I'll keep that in mind, Zoro commented dryly, turning to see his friend brought back from the edge of death. Kaya pulled back from Yosaku, massaging his throat. Her face was suddenly filled with spittle as Johnny shouted in her face, "Is brother Yosaku going to be okay now that you've given him the kiss of life, big sis?" Kaya huffed. He didn't need resuscitation. I was getting him to swallow a pill. I've been making vitamins to help the crews get enough nutrition until we get a proper cook. What I want to know is what was going through your head, not having any fruit in months. Nami nodded in agreement with his sister in arms. Scurvy is on the deadliest dangers sailors face, and also one of the easiest to prevent. Don't you know how important it is to get enough vitamin C? Even I know that, Kadu shouted, somehow hearing the conversation despite being half deaf and on a different ship. Johnny's sweat dropped. Sorry, big sis, we just like our meat, plus fruits are expensive. And the bounties have been tight ever since brother Zoro left us. I wasn't going to let you ride free forever. I gave you enough tips to become decent swordsmen. It's not my fault if you're too lazy to follow through, Zoro put in. Johnny gulped. Sorry, brother Zoro. He turned to face the two pirate ships, obviously with the one he was already on. I must say, this is the last place I expected to find you. What are you doing with all these pirates? They're his nakama. I got Zoro to join my armada, Luffy said. Monkey D. Luffy, pleased to meet you. While Johnny hesitantly shook Luffy's hand, Kaya leaned forward in concern. Darn, he's bleeding again, though his nose doesn't look injured. She trailed off as she realized her patient's eyes were no longer rolled up into his skull and his mouth was drooling as well. Usopp, mind your business, her boyfriend shouted as he delivered justice in the form of a kick in the nards. The injured man shot off to collide with the railing as Usopp huffed. Eyes off my daisy. The party in Kaya-chan's shirt is a private event, you bastard. Thank you, Gatsby. She all but purred, suddenly unable to concentrate on anything but how sexy Usopp was. Recovering from both the attack and his illness, Yosaku popped back to his feet, a lit cigarette somehow in his mouth. Apologies for my behavior, and thanks for your care. I am Yosaku. "And I am Johnny," his partner said, magically appearing at his side. "And we are the hopeless bounty hunters," they proclaimed with pseudo-pride. "And I thought that Afro Jack in the Box was weird," Django said to himself. "I heard that," Gaiman shouted, having his animal companions munch melons and spit the seeds at Django in an unending stream. Luffy ignored the shenanigans of his other crews and the fact that Yasaku had collapsed again. "So, Johnny, since we saved you too, can you do me a favor? I've been thinking that my armada needs some top-of-the-line cooks to keep us fed while we go on our adventures. I don't suppose you know where to find several combat-ready, seafaring gourmet chefs in sailing distance." Johnny looked up from worrying over his partner. Actually, now that you mention it, there is this one place nearby. It's unique, a restaurant at sea. Rumor has it that the man brother Zoro's been hunting was seen there." Zoro clutched his blades. Soon, he would be facing his teacher, and he would achieve his dream or die in the attempt. With a grandiose gesture, Johnny turned to point in a random direction. "The heading is north-northeast, onward to the sea restaurant, Bear 80, spurned by the idea of five-star cuisine." The Armada had been making impressive progress, plus Nami had finally managed to get her apprentices to recognize some basic currents and wind patterns. She still had to shout out corrections at least once an hour, but at least she didn't have to micromanage every move each ship made. With her free time, she had enough mental energy to arrive at a conclusion that would cost someone their life. "Luffy," she called out. "What is it, Nami?" her captain asked, looking up from playing with his pets. That was actually what he did most besides training. Eating and napping on his special seat. He couldn't eat them, but they were pretty cool. Richie even let him ride him. "Who's paying for all 219 of us to eat at the Bear 80? She asked in a sickly sweet tone. Luffy, unlike in the original, recognized the threat. Just like in the original, he paid it no heed. "You are, duh, you're the one with all the money." Nami counted to 10, and reminded herself that rubber didn't conduct electricity. Thunderbolt tempo wasn't the answer. Cyclone would do. "And why would I do that?" she asked, deciding all their history warranted him this one chance. "Because if you do us this one favor, I'll give you one piece." Nami's mental processes skidded to a halt, along with everyone in hearing range. "Say again." Luffy shrugged. "I'll give you one piece. Not as collateral. Not in a supervisory capacity, not as part of the collective account. All yours, to do with as you wish." Nami dimly wondered if she'd really just had an orgasm. "But Captain Luffy, getting one piece is your dream," Shemp cried out in protest and confusion. Luffy rolled his eyes. "My dream is to become the Pirate King. Finding one piece means I'll get that. Once I do, I can do what I want with it. And I'll give it to Nami if she promises to cover us until I get the chefs to join and we don't have to pay." Nami managed a barely audible sure thing before she fainted. No less than half a dozen crewmates appeared to catch her, and they didn't even grope her. It wasn't that they'd learned manners, they just knew she'd castrate them once she woke up if they did. The next day, they spotted the Bear 80 by noon. Luffy covered his mouth to hide his yawn. He'd stayed up most of the night listening to the voice, ironing out the arguments he'd used to convince Seth, and once he'd finished that he'd been unable to sleep, too excited to see Sanji again, and more important, taste his cooking. In his tiredness, Luffy didn't notice the marine ship that they started to pass until its leader shouted out halt. Luffy hopped, turning to see who interrupted his thoughts. He spotted the pink-haired guy in the suit and remembered. Oh yeah, this idiot. He'd all but forgotten about him. "I am Marine Lieutenant Ironfist Fullbody. If my eyes don't deceive me, you're the Buggy Pirates," he said, pointing imperiously at the big top. "And you're the Black Cat Pirates," he continued, regarding the Bezin Black. "Though it seems you've altered your flags," he added, seeing how both Jolly Rogers had a straw hat with a red ribbon worked into the original design. "However, I don't recognize the ship in the middle," he remarked, surveying the smallest of the three, with a goat masthead and a Jolly Roger that consisted of a smiling skull and crossbones, with both the straw hat and an ornate crown atop its head. "Who is its captain?" Luffy hopped over to the big top so he'd be closer and wouldn't have to yell. He already knew how this was going to end, so it'd be easier to be closer. "I'm Monkey D. Luffy, captain of the Straw Hat Pirates and the Going Merry." Both Captain Buggy and Captain Django agreed to join my armada. Hence the change in their flags. "If you don't mind, could you not attack right now? We're all here to eat. We shouldn't ruin our meals with conflict." "So wise," breathed both crews. Django tilted his head. He had the oddest sense of deja vu when he looked at the pink-haired Marine. Fullbody twisted his lips in an ugly grin. "Much as I'd love to honor your request, it's my duty to destroy pirates whenever I see them. Sink them," he shouted at the sailor next to him. Luffy sighed, appearing cool as a cucumber as a cannon was loaded and aimed right at him. "Oh well, your funeral," turning his back on Fullbody. He spoke to the Buggy Pirates. "Boys, today I'm going to treat you to one of my masterful impressions." Fullbody scowled. Fire already. The fuse was lit, the powder caught, and the massive ball of remorseless metal was sent at high speeds right at Luffy's back. It got closer, closer, only for Luffy to lean to the side, letting it pass. Before it got more than a foot away from him, his right hand reached out and got a firm grip. The cannonball froze in place, and Luffy didn't as much as budge. While Fullbody and his crew went into apoplexy, Luffy reached up with his left hand to cup his mouth, giving the impression of a goatee. Iwahaha, you cheeky brat. You're a million years too early to take me on. Meteor fist. So saying, with an impressive wind-up, Luffy threw the cannonball as if it were a baseball. He took care not to aim where he could hear Jin was, but the ship still collapsed to pieces as the ball impacted with more than twice the power of a cannon. A member of the Black Cats, tragically actually named Whiskers, hung his head. He's even scarier than Kuro. The bad luck is supposed to affect our enemies, not us. When I say 1, 2, Django, you will accept the hopelessness of our situation and find peace. 1, 2, Django, the hypnotist captain said. He'd been forced to use this particular command on practically the entire crew, himself included. Once Luffy was sure Jin hadn't drowned and would make his way over to the Barady in due time, he hopped back over to Mary. They really needed to work out a better way to go from ship to ship. Maybe Usopp could come up with something. Once they got to the dock of the fish-shaped boat that was the Barady, Luffy made an announcement. Everyone but the captains and Zoro's friends stay on the ships. I'll get them to send people out to take your orders. First mates, you're in charge. Be nice. Remember, these guys are going to be your nakama. HAI, Captain Luffy, came the thunderous assent. Making sure Hat was snug on his head, Luffy barged into the Barady like he already owned it, followed by Nami, Zoro, Usopp, Kaya, Johnny, Yasaku, Buggy, and Django. The place was much emptier than Luffy remembered. He supposed that the flags of crews with actual bounties got more panicked than unknown riffraff. In fact, he spotted cooks in the back cleaning up what appeared to be a hastily abandoned meal. Before he could finish debating if it was worth using Zoro to get it instead of waiting for Sanji, a large, oddly proportioned man that was all forearms and neck appeared at his side. Welcome, mere bastards. My name is Patty. Table for 9. Luffy shook his head. For us, sure. But I've got 210 nakama in the 2 big ships outside that I want to eat too, not counting the pets. Patty's smile vanished quick as a hiccup, replaced by a suspicious sneer at the ridiculous size of the party. And how do you expect to pay for all of them? Nami casually reached into the apparently infinite depths of her cleavage and pulled out a stack of bills as thick as her wrist. The top bill was a 10,000 buri note. Well, I was thinking cash. And I was thinking all right. Patty was all smiles again. With much bluster, he led them to the best table in the restaurant, smack dab in the middle. Here are your menus. I'll personally see to it that all your crewmates' orders are filled. Meanwhile, our own sous chef shall attend to your table. Bon appetit. The patrons that had the courage to brave pirates dining alongside them gaped like fish as Luffy and co. were offered spring water, the wine list, and hot towels by white-jacketed cooks with blue neckties, all in similar states of sycophancy to Patty. This place is swanky, Buggy noted, rubbing his hands with his gloves still on, rather defeating the purpose of a hot towel. Even I'm impressed, Kaya remarked. And remember Yasaku-san, nothing too heavy. Your system's still recovering. I insist you drink some kind of juice. Yes, Sister Kaya, Yasaku muttered. Who knew the delicate blonde could be so belligerent? Greetings, came a voice smooth as fine whiskey, with enough rasp to remind everyone that it was a true man's man speaking. Luffy almost vibrated out of his skin. He was trying to contain his excitement. I'm Sanji, and I'll be serving you. For the table, compliments of the house, steak tartare. A bronzed hand, encased in the finest silk shirt and suit, navigated the maze of glasses and cutlery to lay the dish in easy reach of everyone. I almost brought the stuffed mushrooms, but I could tell that the long-nosed gentleman doesn't like mushrooms and the monsieur with the straw hat appreciates red meat. The click of finely polished shoes sounded as the presents moved. For the red-headed Venus, of Fruit Macedonia, including the superb tangerines of Kakoyashi Village. Something in my heart just told me she'd love it. Nami had to suppress tears. Okay, maybe he wasn't as much a heartless cat as she made him out to be to Kaya. For the rare perpetually lost prickly Mirimo, our finest sake. I'd heard they prefer to be watered with it over other liquids. Zoro grinned wryly. Shiki curlicue. For you too, the waiter said, coming on Johnny and Yasaku, who were eagerly wondering what special considerations they were getting. I have nothing. Their hearts made lovely tinkling noises as they shattered on the ground. And as for you too, the blonde said, making his way to Django and Buggy. They both had no warning as a leg hard as steel appeared from nowhere and swept them out of their chairs and crashing into the wall. What the hell are you two bastards doing near my nakama? He shouted, his cigarette falling from his mouth as he yelled. What the hell? Buggy cried, prying himself from his imprint in the wood, only to be stunned by what he saw. Usopp and Luffy had linked arms with the waiter and were doing a spirited performance of the can-can. Kaya seemed pleasantly surprised and curious, while Nami was laughing light and free. Zoro was chugging the sake given to him and glaring and smiling at the blonde in equal measure. Sanji, we're back. We're together again, Luffy shouted, clearly on an endorphin high. And also, you just kicked 2 of your new nakama. Pardon? The man asked, still dancing. Luffy decided he wanted an armada. He talked them into joining instead of just kicking their asses. We're going to get in so much more trouble than last time, Usopp explained, suddenly crying while still smiling. Buggy sighed. Another nakama you were separated from yet somehow knew exactly where to find and they knew you were coming. Precisely, Nami answered. When I say 1, 2, Django, your injuries will vanish. You will feel no pain and be perfectly healthy. 1, 2, Django, the hypnotist said, holding his ring inside of both himself and Buggy. That done, they popped back to their feet and reclaimed their seats. Sanji vanished from between Usopp and Luffy, only to appear kneeling before Kaya, rubbing her hand between both of his. And who is this ravishing beauty that shines with the light of the sun across the waves with skin of finest porcelain? He asked, his left eye replaced by a pink heart, the scruff around his mouth crinkling as he gave a simpering grin. Kaya's lips curved into a smile that would repair a broken mirror, while her eyes gave a look that would wither the life from small animals unfortunate enough to be caught in its path. I'm only going to say this once. The only man allowed this close to me is my boyfriend. Touch me for 10 seconds more, and your hands will never touch anything again. 1 slice between the carpus and radius, and all of a sudden you're left with stumps, and my problem is solved. It's been 7 seconds. Do you want to see if I'm bluffing? Sanji leapt back as if he'd been burned, his eye wide in panic. He hastily hid his hands, the livelihood of a chef, in his pockets. My apologies, madam. I was unaware you were claimed. Might I ask who the lucky man is? It's me, Usopp said, curving his arms around Kaya as he stood behind her chair. Sanji's mouth opened wide while his skin turned the color of spoiled milk. You? He asked incredulously. He hummed, before leaning down and seeking a kiss with plenty of tongue. Kaya was happy to oblige. Sanji was suddenly on his hands and knees, wailing $$ and $% like a banshee. A puddle of tears pooling quickly beneath him, pounding the ground with his fist, while blue fire and black clouds appeared above his head, thrusting him into darkness. Luffy laughed like he was at the dentist. That was his cook. Hattie barged through the door, trailing rolls upon rolls of paper filled with black scribbles. Sanji, stop whatever it is you're doing and take their orders. We need you in the kitchen, stat. This is the biggest rush I've ever seen. Right away, he answered, suddenly upright and straightening his tie, perfectly composed. In short order, Sanji had taken their orders, trading barbs with Zoro, falsely apologetic to Buggy and Django, oddly reserved with Kaya, and gushing over Nami. There were sounds of frenzied cooking from the kitchen, with harried cooks frequently running out with huge covered platters to go outside. Luffy clamored for meat while Buggy and Django lamented ever considering joining the armada. In short order, Sanji appeared, balancing dishes in both hands, on his head and his right knee, yet somehow still moving smoothly down the stairs and over to their table. Any lingering resentment Kaya, Johnny, Yasaku, Buggy, or Django might have harbored died the instant the first bite of their meals crossed their lips. It was like their taste buds were transported to heaven with side trips to Shangri-La, Elysium, and Nirvana. It was gastronomic ecstasy. The man might be a world-class pervert, argumentative, and a chain smoker, but holy fuck could he cook. Sanji was frequently summoned back to the kitchen, but he stayed as long as he could with his nakama, informing them of what he'd done while waiting and asking what was different with them, in code of course so none of the others would get suspicious. He was shocked to see that Luffy wasn't stealing from others' plates, and that he actually chewed his food. When he learned Garp had actively tried to kill him this time around, he understood. He paid special attention to Nami, and Kaya could see he meant it more than he had with her. His approach to her was like a badly scripted romance. Every word out of his mouth in regards to Nami was completely genuine. She swallowed a cackle. Project Matchmaker, start. When Luffy had sucked the last morsel off the last bone, he grinned. That was absolutely delicious. Sanji, I'd like to speak to the owner. Right away. Sanji felt a shiver run down his spine when he saw the twinkle in his captain's eye. This would not end well. But he was nothing without his manners, so he complied. In short order, Red Leg Zeph himself was at their table. His hat reached the ceiling, his mustache was so long it was braided, and his hands looked like they could pop a chicken's head clean off. Despite the peg where his right foot should be, there was no doubt he was a guy who could kick your ass. In a gruff voice, he said, I understand you wish to speak to me. Is everything to your liking? Luffy grinned, and suddenly something shifted. The air became heavy as water, and sounds seemed to echo. Time itself seemed to pause to take notice of the moment. Sanji's eyes widened as he realized what was happening. His captain really wasn't just a cheerful idiot this time around. Johnny, Yasaku, and the other patrons looked on the verge of passing out. Buggy, Django, and Kaya swallowed. It experienced brief tastes of this side of Luffy, but this was the first real time it was clear and out in the open. Zeph's only reaction was to raise a brow. "Everything is delicious," Luffy said, and it was with a measured calm, his words falling into a cadence that was only heard in tales of kings of old. "So delicious, in fact, that I find I don't want to eat anything but this food for the rest of my days." Luffy tilted his head so hat no longer obscured his eyes, and he was staring right into Zeph. "Will you come with me to paradise and beyond?" Zeph took a deep breath, girding himself. "What kind of an offer is that?" he asked. He couldn't just blow this off like he would with some pup with delusions of his own power. The man before him had the real thing, and knew how to use it. Luffy chuckled. "Ah, yes, how rude of me." He leaned back in his seat and crossed his arms. The world seemed to narrow down until only Luffy and Zeph existed. "You've had a good run, no one with eyes can deny that. You had your time in the roar of the waves. And now you content yourself with fulfilling your gentler passions and passing on your skills to the next generation. But a soul like yours was never meant to lie still. At the end of the day, as you lie in your bed, you recall those brilliant moments of clarity, defending what's yours from those that would take it away. The bonds thicker than blood forged with those that did the same beside you, dodging death by an inch, and in doing so feeling most alive. You thought you'd had enough, but now that you've tasted peace, you find yourself missing the struggle." Luffy narrowed his eyes. "But you're more a cook than a warrior, I see. You built this refuge for the hungry, a bright light to the desperate lost on these endless seas. And you've watched it slowly lose its luster, haven't you? The children of your hands and passion going to pampered babes that don't appreciate it, while true men were turned away because their purses proved smaller than their stomachs. Do you not remember what it was to feed those that had earned relief, to bask in the warmth of joy and relief as hunger was sated at the end of a day battling the sea and all its dangers? Do you not long for it?" Luffy came to his feet, and he did not appear to be a boy. He was every inch a king, a warrior, a leader, but most of all, a pirate. "My goal lies at the end of the new world. It will be a long journey. I will have nothing but the best to carry me and those I lead along the way. I would have you and yours sail with me, Red-Leg Zeph. What say you?" Zeph closed his eyes. This was the last thing he'd expected when he woke up this morning. What's worse, the words of this silver-tongued stranger were working. Behind his lids, he saw the endless beauty of the sea. His bones, though brittle, were restless. His blood hummed, anticipating a chance to sing once more. But he was not a young fool anymore. He was an old man, with responsibilities and sense. "I cannot. None but my son and I would survive. I cannot condemn my charges for only my sake." Luffy frowned. "You can teach them, as you did your son. And I swear on my life to protect them until they are ready to stand for themselves." Zeph laughed in Luffy's face, a true accomplishment given the weight pressing down on him. "Not even a conqueror can make that promise, youngling." "I can," Luffy stated, his whole being displaying absolute confidence. Somehow, Zeph could not find it in him to deny that. But it had been many years since he had witnessed a miracle, and he had grown skeptical. "Prove to me that you are more than words, and I shall honor your request. Otherwise, get the hell out of my restaurant." With that, Zeph turned and walked away. In an instant, the world was right once more. The air was light and clear, there was no distortion of reality, and Luffy was just another customer. He sat back in his seat with a harumph. "What the hell was that?" Django demanded, so sweaty his glasses had slid off his nose, revealing his beady eyes. "Not a yes," Luffy grumbled. "It wasn't a no, either," Sanji offered, taking a relaxing drag. I think brother Django was referring to the, change," Johnny supplied, quivering like a virgin on her wedding night. Nami huffed. "That, little man, is what happens when two monsters have a stare down. And now I'm stuck paying for all of us until Luffy manages to prove he can keep all the cooks from dying on the Grand Line. Is that what that was all about?" "It was very cryptic," Kaya remarked, fanning herself. Usopp offered her water, trying to hide that his own hands were shaking. He'd never seen Luffy get that serious. They were given a welcome distraction by both doors at the entrance being thrown open. Standing there was a gaunt man, nearly skeletal. He wore a jacket with red dragons on the front over a green shirt and pants of the same color. A headband kept his dark hair out of his eyes. He had a pistol in his right hand. He staggered over to the closest table and all but collapsed into a chair. "Don't care what it is," he rasped, his voice somehow still strong despite his obvious frailty. "Just get me something to eat." "Welcome, mere bastard," Patty greeted, his hands together and a fake grin firmly in place. "Didn't you hear me?" The stranger growled. Yes, but one issue, sir. Will you be able to pay for your meal?" The man lifted his head to glare as he aimed the pistol between Patty's eyes. "You take lead." Patty's smile vanished. "So you can't pay." The cook raised one massive arm to bring down on the starving man, only to have his fist caught. He blinked, only to find Luffy by his side, when not a second ago he was seated halfway across the restaurant. Now, there's no need to get violent. Put him on my tab. I'm always happy to pay for a fellow sailor." Patty, appeased, jerked his fist back and went back to the kitchen to help feed the bottomless maw that was the crew's outside. The man Luffy had just saved seemed less than pleased. I won't take charity, he snarled, followed embarrassingly by the pleading growl of his stomach. Luffy shrugged, an enigmatic grin on his lips. Then consider it a favor. Should we meet again, you'll owe me one. And if we never meet again and I die in your debt, that's your problem. The man seemed to consider it, but better men than him had lost their pride in the face of hunger. Much obliged. He offered his hand. Jin, of the Krieg Pirates. Luffy took it and gave a firm shake. Luffy, of the Straw Hat Armada. Jin's brow raised. An armada, you say? You see those 3 pirate ships outside? They're all mine. Jin grinned wryly. I see. You're not trying to muscle in on the Don's turf, are you? Not at all. I'm taking us to the Grand Line. Not staying here in the East Blue. Jin seemed to freeze. Look, it's not my place, but you really don't want to go there. There's plenty of swag here. There's no need to throw the lives of your men and yourself away. Luffy hid a smirk. Jin would already be coming back when Krieg heard about the Barady, but there was no harm in making doubly sure. But I miss it so much. It's so much more exciting than this place. Jin's eyes widened. You've been to the Grand Line, and I'm going back. Luffy patted him on the shoulder. Anyway, dessert's calling my name. When you're done, tell the clowns outside to give you a boat. Tell them Luffy sent you. We'll probably be here for the next 3 days or so. If you have any question about the Grand Line, feel free to come back and ask. With that, Luffy went back to his table. Jin stared after him in disbelief until Sanji appeared and laid a plate in front of him. Fried rice. It's filling without being too harsh for a sensitive stomach. Enjoy. As Jin hesitantly took a bite, then started all but shoveling the divine treat down his mouth, Sanji had a thought. They were in Armada now? Did Luffy plan to bring Jin along with the shitty geezer and his staff? Well, that was fine with him. He was looking forward to a rematch. The next 3 days settled into an odd routine. Nami continued to bleed money in order to keep everyone sustained on heavenly cuisine. The only thing keeping her from bursting into tears being the thought of the most legendary treasure in the world. The staff of the Barady found themselves forced to get very well acquainted with the pirates, given that they were customers 3 times a day and scared off all but the bravest of their other patrons. While the chef's aggressive demeanors had led to them being cast out by standard society, it was endearing to the pirates. Luffy himself constantly visited the kitchen, either begging for snacks or to just watch them, ogling at the light show that was a gourmet kitchen. Zeph watched in mixed dismay and amusement as the young powerhouse started to woo his cooks over to his side. Sanji was already a lost cause. He seemed to fit in with them like a missing puzzle piece. Speaking of Sanji, he'd eagerly spent the first night catching up with his crew without having to censor himself. Since he'd been chained to the restaurant, he'd had to get very creative in how to get back into New World shape. It ranged from the expected, constant laps around the Barady's fin each morning, to the odd, such as swimming all the way to the island they got their supplies from and swimming back with them perched perfectly dry on his back. Luckily, Zeph and the other cooks had passed it all off as a teenage obsession with fitness in order to be more appealing to the ladies. When he'd pulled up his shirt to show off, which had led to the other boys trying to one-up each other with constant posing, Nami had to admit that she had very handsome Nakama, while Kaya's brain had shut down the moment Usopp had joined in. Sanji and Zoro had fallen right back into the swing of things, insulting each other as easily as breathing. While they restrained themselves to just words while in the restaurant, they sparred every morning and night on the fin, to the wonder of everyone watching. While the Barady chefs repeatedly scolded him for picking fights with a customer, the Armada pirates just marveled at Zoro apparently having met his match. They never actually went all out. Not that anyone could tell, but Zoro ascertained that he was as prepared as he could expect to be for his duel, and the shitty cook hadn't lost his edge. The morning of the 4th day dawned cold, with heavy fog. Yes, Nami crowed, confusing all the crew in the midst of their morning training. Today's the day. Luffy, you better not EFF this up. I'm not paying for another breakfast. Yes, Nami, Luffy replied contritely, raising some suspicions among the crew as to who exactly ran the Armada. Sanji paused in taking out the garbage, his eyes locked on some point in the distance. He'd practiced his observation too. They'll be here soon, and he's right behind them. He turned to look at Zoro, who was calmly meditating. Boy, you ready for today, national treasure? Born ready, dartboard, Zoro shot back. Later, when everyone was lounging either on deck or in the Barady, Gaiman looked up from leading the back rub circle among the pets, his right index finger coming up. Something is not right, he intoned. He rushed to the railing, peering out into the fog. He'd been the lookout on his old crew, and his eyes were sharp. They pierced the gloom, and he shouted out as loud as his shrunken form could manage. Sail ho! Luffy perked up. Showtime. A few non-pirate morning customers spotted the flag fluttering above the approaching shadow and lost their marble. It's the Dawn Krieg pirates. The hourglasses on the flag show that our time is up. Run away. Karn, the third most senior cook and Patty's best friend, seemed disturbed. I doubt that Jingai gave such a glowing review that the Don himself wanted to come eat. This won't end well, I can tell. He paused to slap Patty. You were going to beat up a Krieg pirate, you moron. Oh, come on. Patty defended. What are the odds he would have come here to defend one man? He's got 5,000 of them. Actually, there's only 100 on that ship, Luffy corrected, appearing calm as a Hindu cow. Not that I'm surprised. Look how torn up that ship is. Everyone paused, before taking a second look. Now that the fog was burning off, it was clear that the massive galleon was heavily damaged. It showed the standard wear of a storm, albeit on a heavier scale than any man there had seen. But there were also odd marks in the wood, as if some huge monster had clawed at it. A short ginger pirate with the black cats by the name of Oliver quirked a brow. Is it just me, or do those odd marks look like they were made with a sword? Don't be ridiculous, protested Patty, while the other black cats in Kabaji saw it too. Zoro grinned smugly. His students weren't total blockheads. He was so proud. They watched through the windows as two men lowered themselves down into a raft and rowed the short distance. There was an odd drag thump noise as the presents moved towards the entrance. All the cooks tensed while the armada tried to emulate their captain and play it cool. When the doors opened, everyone that hadn't already deduced what was going on gasped. Jin was dragging the limp form of a man twice his size. His square head was topped with hair the color of lavender, while a massive fur cloak hugged his shoulders. Beneath he wore vacation clothes, which did nothing to make him seem less imposing. The half-dead look in his eyes did the job, though. Please, food, he muttered in a rough baritone before collapsing to the ground. He seemed to muster the energy to put his hands on the ground, making his collapse a prostration. I beg you, food and water. I'll even take scraps. Please. Jin appeared to be near tears. Don, please. Someone as great as you shouldn't have to beg. He turned to face the cooks. Please, you have to feed him. We have money of our own this time, so that makes us customers, right? Are you kidding? Patty asked, disgusted. That's Don Krieg. We're not going to give him so much as a glass of water. Hey, someone, call the Marines. They'll never get another chance like this. Patty, you disappoint me, Luffy said before Jin could protest. Excuse me, Luffy-sama. Patty was confused, and also for some reason cold, like he'd just walked into the meat locker. While not as high as traitors and those that harm the ones I love, hypocrites are pretty up there on my shit list, Luffy explained. When it was just Jin, your issue was that he didn't have money. Again he comes before you, this time with money, and you refuse him again. A man's nothing if he doesn't stick to his word. And yours seems alarmingly fickle. That's not it, Patty protested. He felt like a child getting scolded by a parent, and about as ashamed. Luffy worked fast. It's just that that's Don Krieg. You can't trust him at all. He started out as a marine, then killed his captain and made it a pirate ship. He'd frequently sail into a bay waving marine colors or a flag of surrender, only to attack when everyone let their guards down. He's notorious for doing whatever it takes to get what he wants, and he's violent besides. If we feed him, he'll get strong enough and might attack the restaurant. As a chef, I thought you'd have learned this most basic lesson. No one deserves to starve. Luffy smirked. Sanji knows that, unlike you. Patty's confusion was interrupted by a kick that could crush boulders landed on the back of his head. When he managed to pick himself up, it was to see Sanji laying a bottle of wine and pot of rice before Krieg. Sanji, what are you doing? Feeding a customer, Sanji answered. He gave Jin a grin, which was returned with endless gratitude, then retreated to Luffy's side. Not that he couldn't dodge it, but he didn't see the point in being in arm's reach when Krieg recovered. Krieg was finished eating in minutes. He took a second to let it settle, and then burst to his feet, an arrogant grin on his face. That was delicious. And this boat is pretty nice. No one would suspect it of being dangerous. I'll take it. Jin gaped at his leader. But Don, that's not what you promised. You said you'd just come for the food. Krieg backhanded his loyal underling like he was a dog. Sanji's eyes narrowed. Shut up, Jin. Don't question me. The man looked up to glare at the cooks. He cocked a thumb over his shoulder. I have about 100 men still alive back on my ship. They all need food and water. Get cracking, cooks. Patty scoffed. Yeah, right. The moment we feed them, they'll take over the ship. He didn't learn a damn thing. Luffy grumbled. Don't worry, he's a hopeless student, Sanji assured. Patty swaggered over to a hidden compartment by the stairs. This is the Barady. We fight off pirates every week. We're prepared for these kinds of situations. The Popeye ripoff spun on his heel, leveling a cannon humorously modeled after a crawfish at the unamused Krieg. Here's dessert. Syrup meatball. There was a blast and the entrance was covered with smoke. Patty, sure he'd won, tossed the gun aside. He went down easy. Buggy gulped. I've heard that enough times on the other end of things to know it probably isn't true. Good thing Luffy's here. I hear bad things about the Dawn. I hear you, Captain, Moji muttered. Sure enough, the smoke cleared to reveal Krieg standing there unharmed. What? The cooks shouted. That dessert sucked. Krieg ripped off the tatters of his floral print shirt to reveal gleaming gold plate armor. He pulled pistols from his hip, and several hidden compartments in the armor opened up to reveal more. This is the price of defying me. Die. Without further ado, he fired. The cooks shut their eyes and screamed, certain they were about to die. The deafening thunder of gunshots filled the room. Yet, strangely, none of them felt any pain. When it ended, and their ears were ringing, they cautiously opened their eyes, wondering if they'd just been insanely lucky. Instead, they saw Luffy standing before Krieg, his hands cupped in front of him. "Hey, who are you?" Krieg asked. Smirking, Luffy opened his hands. Dozens of bullets slipped from his fingers to clatter against the floor. Multiple jaws crashed through the floor. "Sorry about that. I understand you're pissed, but I'm afraid these cooks are mine. The details are still being ironed out, but they're as good as my nakama, so I couldn't just let you fill them full of holes, you see." "Luffy-sama," the cooks cried out in awe. From the top of the stairs, Zeph paused in dragging his sack of food and raised a brow. This was interesting." Krieg sneered, somehow failing to realize the caught bullets meant this man was freakishly fast if nothing else. "What do I care if they're your nakama? I'm the greatest. Therefore, mine is the only opinion that matters. Look." He pulled off his gloves, revealing diamond-studded gauntlets. Nami promptly began to drool. She hadn't seen those last time. The hardest, diamond-enforced punch. The finest wood steel alloy armor. The most weapons. A 50-ship fleet. This is power. This makes me great. I am the only man worthy of the title Don. If I see something I want, I take it. I'll get this ship and become the Pirate King. Jin hung his head. He'd never been more ashamed of his captain. These cooks had saved his life. How could he be so cruel to them? Luffy smirked. "And that's strike two. Not only did you attack my nakama, you lied to my face. 'Cause I'm the one who will be the Pirate King." Krieg scowled. "That wasn't funny, punk. Who the hell do you think you are? Monkey D. Luffy. I wish I could say it was a pleasure to meet you, but then I'd be lying." "Luffy," Krieg muttered, retreating into his skull to chase the elusive bell. "Wait, Jin, is this the kid you said had been to the Grand Line?" "Yes, Don," Jin bit out, hating himself. Krieg's eye came alit with malevolent glee. "Ah, then you're the other thing I came here for. You're going to tell me the secret of getting through that blasted sea. Come with me without a fight and you won't get hurt. And that's strike three. That does it. I'm going to kick your ass," Luffy stated like it was simple as taking out the trash. He cracked his neck to the side. Krieg ground his teeth. "And how's a pipsqueak like you going to hurt the great Don Krieg?" "With this," Luffy answered, raising his right index finger and holding in front of his face. "One finger. You must be joking." Krieg threw back his head and laughed, overcome by the hilarity that only he could see. Luffy's eyes narrowed. Armament hardening. His finger became a glossy black, to the shock of the cooks and the anticipation of his crew. As he pulled back his fist, the words his Gramps had said when he started to teach this went through his head. A bullet isn't needed to pierce the human body. Without hardening, Luffy had dubbed this attack Sniper. With hardening, in keeping with the animal theme of naming his attacks, it was called Gamu Gamu no Boar Tusk. Luffy shouted, sending his finger forward with lethal force, his arm stretching until his digits slid into Krieg's heart through the intervening layers like they were thin air. The Woot's armor shattered like fine glass while Krieg's chest seemed to collapse as if he'd been hit with a wrecking ball. The man, already dead, fell backwards, gravity removing Luffy's finger from his chest. It dripped red as the body hit the ground with a dull thud. Jin watched in shock as Luffy pulled back his stretched hand and cleaned the blood off with a napkin. He leaned down to lay his ear next to his Don's face. He heard no breathing. The strongest man he'd ever met, the man he'd dedicated his life to, had just been killed with one finger. "Oi, Jin," Luffy shouted. Jin looked up, feeling like his whole world was teetering on the edge of a cliff. "Remember that favor you owe me. I'm calling you on it. I want you to take command of the rest of your crew and join my armada. What do you say?" Luffy grinned like everything was going to be all right. Jin took a second that lasted an eternity. He thought of all Krieg had done, and he'd never seen him more clearly. He was vain, he was cruel, he was a coward. Then he thought of Luffy, the man who had given food to a stranger, who had defended men who weren't even his, and who had made Krieg look as threatening as a baby. He gulped and leapt off the edge. "I, Jin, commander of the Krieg pirates, pledge my life and my men to Monkey D. Luffy and the Straw Hat Armada," he shouted, bowing before his new captain. "What would you have me do, Don Luffy?" Luffy contemplated how that sounded. It had a nice ring. And if it made Jin more comfortable to use the title, who was he to object? "You're going to lead your new crewmates onto the ship to bring all my injured nakama in here to get some grub. Hop to it, men." "Yes, Captain Luffy," shouted all the Armada men, rushing out the door taking Jin with them. That done, Luffy turned to look at Zeph. He smiled cheekily and tilted hat back. "So, have I proved myself enough, Red Leg Zeph?" Zeph cast an eye from the overall, unharmed faces of his cooks to the corpse of one of the toughest pirates in East Blue. He shook his head. "I knew that sea would never let me go." Men, the staff of Barady leapt to their feet. From this moment on, we're out of the restaurant business. They gaped. Could the owner really mean? From now on, we're caterers. And our sole client, the Straw Hat Armada. As one, the cooks cheered. And they all lived happily ever never mind. My mistake, moving on. The 100 men were soon seated, though they looked more like zombie mannequins than customers. That soon changed as Zeph had his men distribute the meals he'd already cooked. In a matter of minutes, they were revived. They took the news that Krieg was dead and that Luffy was the new Don fairly well. In their minds, they'd already been minnows following a big fish. Now they'd just follow a bigger fish, though this new one was much friendlier than the last, mingling among them and learning each of their names and things about them. Captain, are we really going back to the Grand Line? One brave soul of the renamed Don Pirates asked. That caused all conversation to stop. You guys have been to the Grand Line? Siam asked. Jin shivered. How do you think our ship got so damaged? It was a nightmare, a week of nothing but storms. And then he appeared. He gave no warning, no explanation. He just started taking down our ships one by one. I'm still not sure he wasn't a nightmare. That man with the hawk eyes. All the Don pirates shuddered, suffering flashbacks, while the rest of the armada seemed disturbed, at least until Luffy spoke up. Listen up, me hearties. While that felt weird, I won't say that again. Anyway, it won't be like that for us. Nami here actually knows how to navigate the Grand Line. And Zoro, Sanji, and I are all tough enough to take on a Shichibukai. The men all nodded, appeased. Zeph rose a brow. You're pretty confident in my son there, Eggplant King. If they're talking about who I think they are, then they're lucky to have got off as light as they did. Sanji blushed. He still wasn't used to Zeph openly acknowledging his adopted status. It was usually just little Eggplant. Luffy just shrugged. Sanji's going to be my personal chef and stay on my ship, so of course he's up to my standards. And you're right, it is the guy you're talking about. And we can take him on. Least I hope so, or else today's the day Zoro dies. That won't happen, Zoro stated. He would win. It was that simple. Wait, today? Pearl asked, who had made fast friends with Butcheye, being the only other person of a certain size in the armada. Luffy cocked his head. Oh, didn't you know? He followed you guys here. He'll show up right about now. True to his word, there was an almighty tearing sound and then the galleon sunk like a stone into the sea. Everyone, to your ships. New guys, just stay put. Pull up anchors or we'll sink. Nami roared above the noise. While the Don pirates dealt with attacks of PTSD, the other 4 crews were quick to obey. Suddenly all those drills Nami made them do didn't seem so pointless. 10 minutes later, much more exhausted, the ships were all okay and the ocean had calmed. What's that? Larry asked, looking at something in the distance. Zeph noticed and paled. That's him, one of the Shichibukai, the greatest swordsman in the world. Hawkeye's Mihawk. The name spread like a disease among the armada. They flocked to the rails or the windows to eye the slowly approaching legend. There, clear as day, was the dread Dracula Mihawk. He sat in his tiny raft, just big enough to hold him, shaped like a coffin. Candles that gave off a strange green flame were placed at each vertex. His legs were crossed with his palms laid atop. He looked for all the world like an ordinary man out for a jaunt, were it not for the massive blade on his back or the unearthly color and sharpness of his eyes. As he sailed past the remains of the dreadnought saber towards the Bear 80, one of the Don pirates with more balls than brains shouted out, "You! Why did you follow us back? Why'd you come after us in the first place?" The man spoke up enough to be heard, but no more, as if it wasn't worth the effort. "For fun, you bastard," the poor pirate shouted, the faces of his friends this man had so casually killed flashing before him. He raised up his pistols and fired, crying out like a wounded animal. In a move so fast few caught it, Mihawk drew his sword, brought it around to point at the incoming bullets, and twisted his wrist as the bullets passed the tip of the blade. They both landed harmlessly in the water. Mihawk placed his blade back in its harness as if nothing had happened. The shooter looked down at his guns in confusion. I was sure my aim was good. He redirected them with his sword. The distraught man looked up to see Zoro, his bandana already tied, his arms free of his robe. Just stay put, little frog. I'll avenge your nakama for you. Wait, green hair, 3 swords. Are we nakama with Roronoa Zoro? One of the other Don pirates asked. You bet you are. Now shush. Zoro-sensei is about to fight Mihawk-san. You don't want to miss a second. Kabaji whispered harshly. Your sword has a beautiful voice. It sings when you hold it. You've obviously taken very good care of it. Zoro called out. Mihawk looked up, suddenly alert. This man's voice wasn't a whisper like he'd expected. It was a roar as proud and vicious as a tiger, not unlike his own. He maintained his cool calm as always. Of course, to a true swordsman, his blade is wife, child, and teacher. They are the instruments of our will, giving us power over life and death, and deserve the utmost respect. Zoro grinned and vanished. He reappeared on the nearest piece of wreckage to Mihawk. Those unused to such speed flinched, while the rest leaned forward, the anticipation reaching toxic levels. Would you test your blade against mine? There was an almost manic gleam in Zoro's eyes. Mihawk surveyed his latest challenger. Unlike so many before him, he was a true swordsman. He could feel it. For the first time in what seemed like forever, his blood quickened. What makes you challenge me? Arrogance, greed, a death wish. Zoro drew Wado and pointed it at Mihawk challengingly. An oath sworn on the memory of a rival. I bet my life and honor on surpassing you. Now, with you here, I finally get to see if I win. Mihawk threw his head back and laughed. He laughed loud and strong like he'd heard the best joke of his life. It made some of the spectators nervous as it kept going and going. When he finally calmed, he hopped from his boat to land opposite Zoro. How interesting. Never in my wildest dreams could I have imagined finding a proper match in this sea. Very well then, let us see which of us has the greater conviction. Zoro grinned as he got his blades into position. Mihawk did the same, drawing Yoru and holding it in a simple stance. And for an endless moment, that's all they did. They just stood there, facing each other. Each remained still, seeking the tensing of certain muscles, the twitch of an eye that would betray the other's intention, neither willing to make the first move. The very air started to shake, as if it could not handle the weight of these two monsters. They haven't even done anything and I'm already shaking. Is this what a duel between true swordsmen is like? Butchai whispered. Few of those have happened throughout all of history, and fewer still can claim to have witnessed them. Zeph breathed. Men, all of you pay attention. This is a battle that will go down in history. Don't waste this gift. Luffy's lips twitched up from their worried line. Make me proud, Zoro. In a blur of steel, Zoro rushed forward quick as a striking snake. He brought all three blades down in a diagonal slash that would turn Mihawk into sashimi. His target tilted his blade to catch them, and the force of the impact generated gale force winds. The sky split above them, clouds fleeing from the clash of titans. Ripples spread out for miles, sending droplets into the air where they seemed to hang suspended in the air. Some of the unsuspecting witnesses were blown off their feet into the ocean, but their fellows paid no notice. In the time it took to notice the after-effects of the first attack, the duelers had already finished the next 100. Neither moved their feet more than a few inches. Yet their bodies twisted and jabbed so swiftly there seemed to be a dozen combatants. Zoro's three blades seemed to have minds of their own, striking from every angle, flowing like liquid death through the air, an unstoppable force. Each time they were met, the adamantine pillar of the best crafted sword the world had ever seen. It blocked every advance, seemingly moving before the next attack even started, reflecting all force as if they were pebbles thrown by children, the immovable object. As the blades clashed, sparks did not fly. That was beneath such masters. Full-fledged flames were born at each movement of steel against steel, flying off into the air and dying within seconds like the ghosts of each heartbeat that fueled the monsters at battle. Zoro and Mihawk seemed to be in the heart of their own sun. Begone, Mihawk shouted, twisting Yoru to catch the next attack on the flat of his blade, and then pushing Zoro away with the full strength of his body. Zoro was sent flying ass over tea kettle as the air cleared around Mihawk. Instead of crashing, Zoro caught his feet on the piece of wreckage listing skyward he was hurling towards a millisecond before he hit. He left a crater, but for an instant momentum overcame gravity, and despite being horizontal he was grounded. Santoryu, Senechiju pound ho, he roared. A swirling vortex of opaque wind sprung into being, coming at Mihawk with all the speed and ferocity of a charging rhino. Yet the man was already gone, perched atop a mast rising out of the water like the spear of a maritime god. The chunk of ship they'd been standing on was reduced to dust fine as sand by Zoro's attack. Zoro stuck Yubashiri in the wood as gravity reclaimed him and swung on it like a monkey to land atop hunk of deck he was on. He eyed Mihawk across the distance, grinning like a madman. He saw the expression matched in his opponent's face. Then the rest period was over and the fight resumed. The fact they were at opposite ends of the chosen battlefield made them no less deadly to each other. They continued to slice at each other with abandon, the wind carrying their attacks like the messenger of the gods. By the time they reached their destinations, their target had already moved. Zoro and Mihawk seemed to flit across the ruins of Krieg's flagship like schizophrenic teleports, mincing the massive fragments of the Dawn Pirates home as they went. What the fuck kind of fight is this? Butchai asked hysterically. His eyes hurt from trying to follow the flashes of green and black lightning that were the fighters, the kind I ran far, far away from. And now I'm going back. Damn you, Luffy, Buggy shrieked. Big brother, Johnny and Yasaku cried, reduced to gibbering wrecks by how many attempts were currently being made on their friend's life per second. If you die on us, Zoro, I'll never forgive you. Usopp shouted in encouragement. What he said, you shitty Murimo. Sanji offered. Win this and I'll free you from your debt. Just don't lose, you infuriating numbskull, you. Nami seemed shocked by the words that had come out her mouth, but the worry didn't leave her face. The things she did for Nakama. Tiring of the cat and mouse, Mihawk leapt high and planted his feet on the arms of the guard of his sword, as if he were riding it, and sank like a shooting star towards Zoro's back. Take this. Unseen by Mihawk, Zoro grinned. Faster and faster Mihawk went, using armament to increase his mass, heading straight for his challenger. At the last possible moment, Zoro turned, the curving tip of Yoru touching nothing but air as the green head twisted. By the time he completed his turn, he and Mihawk were almost face to face. Zoro whispered his attack's name around Wado so only his mentor could hear. Rengoku Onigiri. A gigantic geyser sprung up as the weight of Mihawk's dive hit the water. As it rained back down, the armada could make out Mihawk and Zoro, facing away from each other. A bloody X formed on Mihawk's chest as he yanked Yoru out of the platform. He turned to face Zoro, who did the same. It seems I get first blood. Mihawk bared his teeth. I've not bled at the hand of another in years. I'd forgotten how humbling it is. In an instant, Mihawk was lunging at Zoro, Yoru seeming to go for miles as it moved through the air right at Zoro's heart. Allow me to return the favor. Zoro cursed himself for getting cocky as he hastily brought up Sandai and Yubashiri in a cross guard. He barely managed to catch the tip of the blade an inch from breaking the skin. Mihawk heaved upwards, breaking Zoro's guard and holding Yoru high above his head with only his left hand. Zoro's eyes widened. He recognized these movements. The human drill boss had done the exact same thing right before he lost his eye. Mihawk's right hand shot towards Zoro's face, the tiny knife hidden in his necklace glimmering the light of the noon sun. But Zoro had already started to lean back and twist away, trying to move his body out of range. The end result was, instead of permanently losing his left eye, he got a cut that ran up his cheek to his temple, catching on the corner of his socket. Zoro landed from his impromptu flip and leapt back. He kept his right eye on Mihawk as he brought up his left hand to feel the damage. It hurt like a bitch, but his eye was fine and the blood wasn't going to run into it. He was fine. Mihawk cocked his head, his eyes all but glowing. You did not observe that. You knew it was coming. Have we met before? In another life, Zoro answered, both honest and cryptic. I believe we've got a measure of each other now. Let's not play around anymore. With that, the power of Zoro's will and determination crossed the barrier between the spiritual and physical, manifesting as 2 heads, 4 arms, and 2 copies of each of his swords. Kiki Kudoryu, Asura. Mihawk raised a brow while those watching gaped at the unnatural display. Zoro meanwhile adjusted to the odd awareness and strain of this form. Once he started learning Haki, he realized he'd been using observation, albeit badly, as early as Arabasta. But he'd never suspected, or rather not questioned until Mihawk brought it up in the original timeline, that his trump card was one of the more advanced applications of armament, more commonly known as Eidolon. It went beyond simply augmenting like hardening and gave special properties unique to the person using it. Most impressive. Mihawk grinned and assumed a tall, proud stance. I'll return the favor. In an instant, Mihawk seemed to catch fire. But unlike normal flame, with a yellow heart and orange edges, this was green and purple. In the shadows of the unearthly blaze, Mihawk's eyes blazed like fire opals. The lines of his face seemed leaner, gaunter, like he was a zombie, and his teeth had morphed into fangs. With his massive black blade and short knife, he appeared to be a god of death. The real fight starts now, Luffy said, his face impassive. Please tell me you're joking, Kaya begged, huddled in the safety of Usopp's arms. She couldn't have imagined human beings capable of this level of conflict. Her answer came as they moved. Mihawk slashed from his left to right shoulder. A crescent of his flame expanded out at the speed of thought. It raced into the distance, far as the horizon. Anything unfortunate enough to be in its way collapsed as it cut all the way through, only to begin burning as the vibrant flames consumed anything it touched. Zoro had sliced right through it, though. His skin turned lobster red at the extreme heat, but he paid it no mind. He dashed forward, his voice echoing as he bellowed Asura, Ichibugin. All 9 blades came down on Mihawk, any one of them capable of cutting clean through him. Mihawk avoided all but 2, the first only grazing him, the second almost disemboweling him. If the crippling pain he had to be feeling bothered him, he didn't show it. He took the opportunity afforded by Zoro's proximity to stab his knife right between the ribs. The rest of the battle was just as brutal. How the bloody blue hell are they still standing? Kadu asked an hour later. Any one of those injuries should have them out of commission. They're covered in them, yet they're still going. Zeph grunted. It's quite simple. Both of them refuse to die. Not until the winner is decided. And when will that be exactly? Django asked. I'm not sure I can take much more of this weirdness. When one of them admits defeat. The armada stood there, watching, as the sun slowly made its course across the sky. It was impossible to become bored with 2 gods duking it out, and many weren't sure they could take the strain. It was exhausting just watching them. At last, as the sky was starting to turn orange and the first stars were visible, it came to a close. Mihawk watched in dull detachment as his prized sword slid from his fingers. He couldn't decide whether it was because his fingers were slippery with his blood or he simply didn't have the strength to hold it anymore. He lifted his heavy head to look at the man who had bested him. Zoro was heaving like a bellows, and there wasn't a square inch of his skin that wasn't in some way harmed, but his grip on his katana was firm. Suddenly, Mihawk started to shake with giggles, stopped only when he had to pause to spit out the blood that bubbled to his mouth. What's so funny? Zoro asked between pants. It occurs to me that I do not know your name, Mihawk wheezed out. Zoro somehow found the strength to grin. Roronoa Zoro. Mihawk's eyes twinkled. A fine, strong name. It is an honor to die by your hand, Roronoa Zoro. The honor was mine, Zoro insisted. Indeed. Mihawk fell to his knees, but he stayed upright. He brought up a trembling hand to stroke the bit of his intestines that had slipped from a gash in his abdomen. It would seem the first part is taken care of. If you would be so kind. He trailed off. Zoro shakingly sheathed Sandai and Yubashiri, almost missing the scabbards. Then, with halting steps, he made his way to stand beside Mihawk, Wado held in both hands. As he brought it up over his head, he paused. This might seem greedy, but can I ask you for something? Mihawk closed his eyes, his face falling into peaceful lines. You are a pirate. What is it, my successor? I like the hat, Dracula-sensei, Zoro said wryly. Mihawk managed one last scoff. Of all the things. Fine. His last words spoken, Mihawk bowed his head. Zoro nodded and brought down his sword. And that was how Dracula Mihawk, the greatest swordsman in the world, royal Shichibukai of the world government, last prince of Shikaru kingdom of Kirigana Island, died. Zoro turned from the headless corpse of the man had guided his every move, in one way or another, since he was 9 years old. With trembling limbs, he raised Wado Ikamanji over his head, pointing at the glistening heavens. Kuina. ... We did it. And, Mark, Zoro has officially broken the record for longest recovery. Can you not joke at a time like this, Usopp? Nami snapped. Nami Swan, go easy on the long nose. He's just trying to lighten the atmosphere. He means well. Sanji offered her a cup of tea, just the way she liked it. Nami sighed. It's been 6 days. I mean, logically, it should take months for him to recover from that many injuries. But I'm so used to him grumbling the next day, already taking off his bandages. Not if Kadu and I have anything to say about it. Kaya injected, looking up from taking Zoro's temperature. The first mate of the Straw Hat crew looked like a second-hand mummy. They'd quickly exhausted Kadu's supply of gauze when treating him in those frantic hours after his victory, so the patchwork wrappings were all stained with various bodily fluids that need not be named. Zoro had almost collapsed right into the sea after his odd apostrophe to the sky, only to be caught by Luffy. Then he'd been immediately moved to Mary's galley, where Kadu and Kaya bit off way more than they could chew, trying to combine herbal remedies and beginner's knowledge of medicine to try and keep Zoro from dying. They might well have failed were it not for the unexpected aid of Mayasa. He'd been patching himself up after bar fights for years, and he had an unlimited number of surprisingly effective street hacks to help trauma. The 2 medical women would never have thought to use glue to seal the gaping wounds, and vodka doubled as disinfectant on top of being a painkiller. The gruff cook had just shrugged when offered profusive thanks. Is nothing. We comrades now. Must look out for each other, he'd said in his odd accent. Still, it was a miracle that Zoro was still alive, given the amount of damage and the level of care they could provide. The core crew had never longed more for Chopper. The only one that didn't seem to be getting gray hairs was Luffy. I can still hear his voice. It's weak, but it's there. He's not dying on us. Not right after he reached his dream. It's odd, thinking that the sword brain got his dream already, Sanji spoke up. Well, mine was pretty vague. If you interpret Brave Warrior of the Sea as famous pirate, then I already got it after a nice lobby. Usopp grinned smugly, though his heart didn't seem to be in it. You're making it worse, Sanji hissed. Oh, please Sanji-kun, don't tell me you're so petty as to be jealous that Zoro beat Mihawk before you found all blue. Nami demanded. It's not that, he protested. A grim look crossed his face. It's just, dreams are the glue that held us together. Now that he proved he's the strongest, what reason does he have to stay with us? Really, Sanji, I'm surprised at you, Luffy spoke up, coming into the office. We're Nakama. Did you honestly imagine we'd just go our separate ways when we finished everything? We're family. We'll find new dreams and help each other reach them all over again. Zoro's not going anywhere. Captain, Sanji answered, mollified. Kaya looked up. I'd have thought you'd like it if Zoro-san left, Sanji-san. He only seems to vex you, after all. Sanji looked away, blushing. Well, who else is going to help me keep my skills sharp? Sure, he's uncouth and misogynistic and unhygienic and a total pain in the ass, but I'd miss him if he left. I guess, maybe a little. A chuckle dry as the desert rasped from a broken throat. I'm never going to let you forget you said that. Love Cook. Zoro. Everyone screamed. The corner of the swordsman's lip twitched up, and even that simple move seemed to exhaust him. Damn, I feel worse than after that run-in with Kuma. He glanced over to Luffy and his eyes twinkled. Did I make you proud, Captain? Fit to burst. Luffy proclaimed proudly, smiling so wide his cheeks looked ready to burst like balloons. Congratulations, Zoro. You've given me the perfect story. It's so outrageous that no one will believe me. I can lie by telling the truth now, the ultimate achievement. Of course, I'd attempted it many times before. Usopp went off on some compulsive tangent. You're slipping, Marimo. If it were me fighting Mihawk, I wouldn't have gotten a scratch. Fuck you, Dartbrow. Sanji hid a grin. Never mind. Precious little patients shouldn't be getting worked up with arguments they can't win. Shut up, he moaned as harshly as he could manage. For the record, even though I cleared your original debt, I'm charging you for all the medical supplies we had to pick up to save your reckless ass. So you better pay up soon or it won't end up helping you much. Heartless witch. Luffy laughed. Zoro bickering with everyone. All was right with the world. I've got some catching up to do. The strongest swordsman in the world deserves nothing less than the Pirate King as his captain. No rush. I know you'll get there, Zoro breathed. He tried to swallow, and Kaya appeared with a glass of water with a straw like magic. Zoro suckled, hating how weak he felt. It was like he was a helpless baby. So what happened? After, he managed. How could talking feel as hard as fighting his sensei? Luffy shrugged. I got to you right after you passed out. For some reason, you were holding his hat, so I picked that up along with you and got you over here so Kaya and Katu could patch you up. Then I went over and gave Mihawk a proper send-off. I still don't understand why you burned him with the sword. That thing was probably worth millions, Nami grumbled. Nami, it was his sword. He deserved to be buried with it. Luffy was unyielding. Nami shrugged. She'd never understand this stupid thing men called honor. Anyway, you were practically on death's door, so we rushed the fleet over to the nearest island to get all the stuff the girls needed to fix you. I had those annoying friends of yours turn and Krieg to the local marine base. I didn't even need to weasel them to get a good cut. They gave it all to us. They said tell brother Zoro it was a true honor to have known him. I think they thought you were already dead and we were going through the motions. Usopp shrugged. It's not unreasonable. They're just average blokes. They don't know how much punishment people at his level can take. Hell, considering Kaya's just starting reading medical books and Katu's barely better than store-bought medicine, I wasn't sure he'd make it myself. Again with the lack of confidence, Zoro huffed. Anyways, we stayed long enough for Zeph and Nami to get us resupplied, and we've basically been slowly making our way to Nami's island while waiting for you to wake up. The Black Cats seem particularly interested. Most of them have built shrines to you. I think you've earned yourself some lifetime disciples. Zoro sighed. Didn't even get any time to enjoy being the best. Already he had apprentices clamoring for him. Speaking of which, we've moved up to 2-a-days now that we've got Sanji and his special food to help get everyone strong. Plus, everyone got really eager to train for some reason when I said we'd be seeing lots of guys on Mihawk's level on the way to One Piece. Luffy shook his head. It's amazing, really. All the normal guys on Buggy's crew are almost as strong as Buggy and his officers were when they started by now. Why didn't we get stronger that fast? We were winging it. We didn't have teachers helping us every day that knew exactly how high up the big leagues are. Plus my attack cuisine can work wonders. Sanji popped a lollipop in his mouth. Kaya had absolutely forbidden smoking near Zoro, so he'd settled for this crutch while waiting for his nakama to awaken. We're just lucky they bought my excuse that I've been experimenting with recipes with medicinal properties, and that my old geezer never went to the Kamabaka Kingdom. I'd have a time and a half explaining how I got my hands on their national treasure. On that note, Usopp spoke up. The other crews are going to start asking questions eventually. No matter how much we awe them, it's hard to swallow us popping up out of the weakest sea already ready for the strongest. Do we tell the truth? If so, to whom? If not, should I start working on some backstory now? Luffy waved a hand like brushing away a fly. We'll tell them the truth, Dao. They're our nakama. Let's not bother till they start insisting though. Hopefully by then they'll stop worshipping us and just accept it instead of acting all weird. The captain suddenly pounded his fist. Speaking of the men, Luffy ran to the door and threw it open. Looking out on the big top, Bezin Black, and Bear 80. Between the pets, Buggy's crew, and the displaced Dawn crew, the circus ship was finally filled to capacity. Luffy had sworn to get his newest crew a ship of their own at earliest opportunity, but they insisted they were fine with their cramped situation. Oi, everyone. HAI-CAPTIN-DONLUFFY. Zoro's awake, so now we can stop holding off the party. Anchor for the night, boys. We're celebrating having the world's strongest swordsman in our armada. KANPAI. Came thunderous approval. Oi, mustache guy. Prepare for a feast. Don't tell me what to do, Eggplant King. Zeph shouted back. He'd swiftly learned that the calm, collected leader he'd made a pact with was a very rarely seen side of his employer. Zeph insisted he and his men weren't pirates, just working with the Armada on an indefinite contract. It actually worked out. Since the Bear 80 were designated the guard force, they would be inconspicuous, not obviously with the crew, acting as a secret last line of defense. After all, they were brought on for their cooking skills, not for combat. Though Zeph had begun pounding his black leg style into their heads so they wouldn't be, quote, helpless ninjas out there. The Dawn Pirates, on the other hand, were going to be made the demolition squad. They already favored maces and axes over plain swords, so it wasn't that much a shift to make them the heavy hitters, just a massive increase in expectations. Luffy wouldn't allow them to coast on numbers. They had to be ready to defend their nakama from anything if they expected to stay on his crew. Jin has assured him he'd get them ready in a timely manner, unaware that all his men, even Pearl, wore expressions of terror behind him. Jin was a notorious taskmaster as commander under Krieg, and it appeared he'd only gotten worse now that he was captain and had an even higher ideal to hold himself to. Through sheer persistence, he'd gotten his crew to roughly the same level as the Black Cats, despite the head start. Nami looked up as Luffy came back in. I'd hate to bring up an inconvenient topic, but we all realize we're now doomed, right? Soon as word gets out that this idiot beat Mihawk, he'll be public enemy number 1 and we'll go down with him. Wow, Nami, way to kill the mood, Usopp grumbled, clutching Kaya close. Luffy rolled his eyes. He was getting tired of Nami's belly aching. Really, if she thought about it for a second, she'd see there was no reason to worry. Yet, and how will word get out exactly, Nami? Well, obviously, Nami drew a blank. She'd kind of just assumed knowledge would get out. But now that she tried to logically ascertain the means, she found herself stalling. The only people in the world that know what happened to Mihawk are on these 4 ships. I didn't spend the whole time just watching, you know. I was listening for people coming, and scared them off with conquerors before they got close. They might have seen some pretty lights before they got a sudden overpowering urge to run away. But no one knows the exact details but us, so they'll never find out. Nami asked, her eyes lighting up with hope. Oh, they'll find out. In a couple weeks, the higher-ups will realize it's been a while since Mihawk reported, so they'll send a messenger bat demanding a response. When it comes back with its letter unopened, they'll panic and realize he's either dead or hiding. So they'll set up a massive task force to find out what happened. And these guys have information gathering to a science. They have people all over the world whose only job is to listen in at bars and town squares for information. And people talk. Those folks that I turned away. At least one will mention to a friend something weird happened when he tried to catch dinner at the Barrady. Who'll tell it to another friend or a cousin or his shoe shiner or someone. Who'll eventually exaggerate it while sloshed to try and give a good story to his pals or impress a lady, and someone with the world government will hear it. Some tired clerk will read the report a month later, see it happened around the right time within the maximum distance Mihawk could have traveled from his last known location, and decide it's worth investigating. They'll track the story back to the source and get the most the poor sap can remember with some harried interrogator battering them. Said interrogator will give the report to his supervisor, who'll give it to his supervisor, and so on until it reaches someone that has seen or at least heard of a duel between serious swordsmen, noticed the signs, and raised the idea that Mihawk was in a serious fight. By that point, we'll have built a bit of a reputation for ourselves, and people will start to notice how insanely good Zoro is. Some bright, eager new recruit will boldly suggest that Zoro is the one that fought him, Occam's razor being what it is, and in the lack of any better theories, they'll decide Zoro killed or at least didn't lose to Mihawk, to appear strong and decisive. They'll then plaster Zoro's face all over the news and give him some record-breaking bounty that will make every hunter who hears it drool. All of this being just the most likely scenario if we don't do anything to brag or otherwise control how the world finds out. Nami's face fell. Damn, Luffy sighed and reached over to rub her shoulder. Look, Nami, I know that I'm tempting fate here, and if anyone wants to avoid the kind of clusterfuck that got us here, it's me. But in all seriousness, I think I could take on an admiral alone and reasonably expect to survive. Zoro just beat Mihawk. We're all up to the level we used to be, if not above. And if Buggy's goons could go from cannon fodder to half-decent grunts in a month, I'm sure they'll each be as strong as I was starting out by the time we get to Water 7, and the other crews we pick up won't be that far behind them. And all the other captains and their officers are going to level up like we did the first time. If the Marines and world government crap themselves and send everything and they kitchen sink after us, we'll be ready for them. Nami hung her head. Luffy, I want to trust it'll be okay. I wish I could trust all our new Nakama like you can. But all I can think about is some Marine geezer panicking, naming you the next Whitebeard, and sending a buster call on us before the other crews are ready. We might make it out, but, damn it, all those bad guys aren't bad guys anymore. They're our allies, and somehow, the thought of us surviving while they get mowed down is even worse than us all dying. Nami angrily swiped at her eyes. Damn it, why'd you have to complicate everything? Why couldn't we have just done things the same as last time? Zoro croaked, though it might have been a laugh. The crew turned to look at him. He seemed ready to pass out after only an hour awake. But it was understandable. Idiot. Last time didn't end well, if you don't remember. Besides, things change. We're not the same people we were. We couldn't do things the same if we tried. It's a whole new start. We have more information this time, but we're going to get caught off guard as many times as last time, I guarantee you. so suck it up and remember you're a pirate. It's an adventure. Couldn't have said it better myself, Zoro. Luffy grinned, but the man was already asleep. I'll start working on some hormone soup. If he's not unusually stupid, he should be able to move by Logtown. With that, Sanji moved over the stove and began to prepare the food. He left off on dinner for the rest, knowing Zeph would provide as part of the party. After one last check on her patient, Kaya wandered outside, dragging Usopp. She'd been on alert for almost a week, making sure Zoro didn't slip into a coma or worse at all hours. She needed rest, and Usopp had a sleeping pill with her name on it. Not really, though she might give that argument another go. She'd go for the tattoos or sexy angle. Luffy gave Nami one last look before going out to mingle with the crew and prepare for the party. Nami sighed. They'd just passed one of the biggest hurdles they'd ever faced as a crew, even if Zoro did most of the work. Soon, she'd face her childhood tormentor. And even though they were a million times better prepared than last time, she still felt a twinge of fear at the thought of Arlong. And past him, the horizon was dark and stormy. She thought knowing the route would make it easier this time, but she of all people should know how quickly the weather could change. This wasn't going to be an idealized repeat of their early adventures. The tale of the Straw Hat Armada was going to be its own unique story, with its own surprises and heartbreaks. But she was the navigator. It was going to be her job to guide them all through the storm. And she'd have her Nakama at her back, ready to help her. Nami grinned and stole one last moment of peace before the waves began. "Marry me," Pearl moaned as he bit into a kebab. Patty rolled his eyes. "Okay, at first that was funny, but that's the 6th time tonight. Are you all that drunk or do I give off that vibe? Because I can tell you right now that I got no interest in your schnitzel." "Chillax, bro. It's just you're an awesome cook. And the way to a man's heart is his stomach," Butcheye explained, pulling his new best friend away from attempting to plant one on the harried cook. It was almost midnight, but the party was still going strong. The Armada was all huddled in a little triangle with the Barady safe in the middle, and food and drink were flowing freely. The crews had started out segregated, but as the night wore on and the alcohol kicked in, they'd swung on ropes from ship to mingle and make new buddies. As Luffy said, they were all Nakama. "Everybody, step right up. It's time to play Hit the Buggy. 10 points if you hit his chest. 50 points if you hit his head. Can you touch the amazing splitting man? Come and see," Usopp shouted, having obtained a candy-striped vest and cane from somewhere and gesturing to the various parts of Buggy floating all over the place. "When I say 1, 2, Django, you will be a prima donna ballerina." 1, 2, Django, slurred the hypnotist. A moment later, Karn had launched into a spirited performance of Swan Lake, to the rousing laughter of anyone that watched. "A toast to Zoro-sensei proving he's a bamf," Kabaji shouted from the mast of the Bezant Black. "Kanpai," shouted everyone who heard before sucking down their cups. Zeph chuckled to himself as he sucked on a cigar. He'd turned off the kitchens after the last batch of snacks, and he was enjoying the atmosphere now that he wasn't working to fuel it. "I'd forgotten how rowdy these kinds of parties could get. How'd I ever leave this behind? How should I know, shitty geezer?" Sanji puffed on his own cigarette. He preferred a quick fix over the heavy-duty shit his old man smoked. Zeph growled cheeky eggplant, before glancing at all the antics of the men. "It's weird. I expected it to be a bunch of suspicious groups warily forced to work together by the top dog. But it feels more like one huge crew grouped into teams. I wouldn't have believed it possible." Sanji chuckled. "Luffy's the son of the devil. I'm not sure there's anything he can't do once he sets his mind to it." Zeph gave his son a look from the corner of his eye. "You seem awfully sure considering you've barely known him a week." "Something you're not telling me, Lil Eggplant?" Sanji was too mellowed by good booze and nicotine to tense. "That's for me to know and you to find out, crap geezer." Zeph snorted and almost set fire to his mustache. "Whatever, I don't really care. I've never seen you so happy. If the Eggplant King has something to do with that, then that's all I need to know." Sanji felt his heart melt. "Thanks, Pops." There was a quiet moment of peace. "Though if I catch you having sex in my kitchen, I'm cutting it off with my cleaver," Zeph tacked on. "What the hell, you crazy geezer? It's not like that. I don't like guys. I like ladies." "Ladies, with the bouncy and the jiggle and the squish. How on earth did you get that idea?" Sanji exploded. Kadu tilted her head. She'd managed to catch that. "Hey, if Sanji was gay, wouldn't he and Zoro make an awesome couple?" "Thank God," Kaya shouted, startling Nami. The girls had been clustered together having some much-needed gossip while the menfolk acted like idiots. "I thought it was just me." "You're right, they'd be freaking hot. Zoro's all strong and stoic. Sanji's awesome in kitchen and he's so flexible. Plus they're always fighting, so they'd have tons of rage and make-up sex. I'd pay my fortune to see that." "You've already paid it to do it yourself with Usopp," Nami reminded her roommate, her face pinched. The ridiculousness of the pairing aside, she found she simply didn't like the idea of Sanji with anyone. Why the hell was that? "Speaking of the long nose, does he earn all those screams of yours, or are you just trying to puff his ego?" Kadu asked, leaning in. girlfriend, he's a god. And it's not just his nose that's long, teehee. Kaya giggled. Right, well, I just remembered I've got that. Oh, screw it, I'm leaving. Nami fled to the other end of the Mary. She did not need to know the details about Usopp's stuff. Sure, he'd seen her in all her glory, but that was so she could get money. Wonder if they'd pull that again. Given how many more men were on the crew, she'd get rich off happiness punch. If they could actually pay up. Well, you can't win them all. Nami shook her head and looked up to find she'd somehow made it onto the big top. While Luffy just jumped from ship to ship, the rest of the armada had gotten very good with swinging on ropes from the mast, so much so that she could manage it unconsciously while buzzed. She burst into giggles as she saw Luffy leading a Congo line with Gaiman and all the pets behind him. She'd seen him with Shushu a lifetime ago, but she'd never realized how good Luffy was with animals. If only that extended to fishmen. Hey, Captain, she called out, sobering up. Yeah, he asked, appearing at her side. His stomach was a little distended, but he wasn't a bowling ball like she'd come to expect when he ate at a party. He'd really learned self-control. Nami frowned, chiding herself for getting sidetracked. Look, I know we've been putting it off to make sure Zoro's okay, but my deadline to get back to Arlong Park is tomorrow. If I'm late, he'll start killing someone for every day I don't show up. Don't you think we should let them know? Luffy frowned. Shit, you're right. Wait, how off schedule are we? Nami shrugged. I showed up 2 days earlier the first time. How much difference could 2 days make? Luffy kept his mouth shut. If they'd been 2 days late getting to Arabasta, Crocodile would have wound up king of the smoking crater that was once a Lubarna. But he didn't want to break it to Nami. Hopefully nothing really bad happened. If it had, well, they all had to learn that things weren't going to be peaches and cream just because they knew one version of how things could turn out. Right, well, I probably should let them know. Taking a deep breath, so much so he swelled up, he screamed at Ten Hut. In an instant, all revelry ceased as the members of the Straw Hat Armada stood at attention. HAI, Captain. Luffy chuckled. At ease. I just have something important to say. He really didn't want his crew to wind up like some anti-marines. They were pirates, first and foremost. As everyone got comfortable, Luffy cleared his throat. Men, there's something I haven't told you. You see, Nami here, Luffy gestured to Nami, who gave a shy wave. This wasn't exactly what she expected. She's got a problem. See, she was already part of another crew when she joined me. The Arlong Pirates, to be exact. Arlong. Siam asked, looking as scared as when he pulled off his act. No wonder she's so scary, Larry commented, getting many nods at the Stooge's wisdom. Even the Don knew better than to mess with those guys, Jin said to himself. All right, quiet down, Luffy shouted. The thing is, Nami didn't join of her own free will. When she was 10 years old, Arlong and his gang invaded her island. He made everyone pay for their own lives, each month. Now Nami and her mother and sister weren't very wealthy, so her mother paid for her and her sister to keep her daughters safe, and then Arlong killed her, right in front of Nami. Nami looked away. She was determined not to cry, though seeing how almost every face filled with anger on her behalf almost did her in. These men, who'd once been her enemies, were now sad that she was sad. It was so weird, and kind of heartwarming. As if that weren't enough, Arlong saw one of Nami's maps. He decided that no one but him could have such awesome maps. So he forced Nami to join his crew. And so, for 8 long years, she's been forced to work for her mother's murderer, using her precious navigation skills to help her people's oppressors, hated by her friends that thought she betrayed them. And it was all because of a Arlong. A roar of rage filled the night. So you're going to go kick his ass, right, Captain Luffy? Moji shouted. Luffy gave a little grin. Oh, I'm not going to kick his ass. You guys are. The righteously angry mob went silent so fast it was like flipping a switch. What do you mean, Don? Asked Woj, the navigator of the Dawn Pirates. He was basically Nami's exact opposite, male, generous, soft-spoken, with ice blue hair. But he had a natural talent, unlike Mo and Butcheye who just were interested and receptive to lessons. They're fishmen weirdos. There's no way we can beat them. Django protested. I thought you said you weren't going to just use us as meat shields, Straw Hat. Buggy accused. Luffy frowned and raised a hand to quiet the grumbling. Look, I'm not doing this because I'm scared or lazy. I'm not making you guys do this just because I don't want to. Believe me, I want to. I want to make Arlong bleed for everything he's done to Nami. But if I keep swooping in to take out all the bad guys, how are any of you going to get any stronger? Sure, we train every day, and you're all coming along nicely, but the only way to really tell how good you are in a fight is to fight. I can't be everywhere. If I shelter you all, then one day we come across too many guys for me to handle. How will you guys deal with it? I mean, sure, Zoro and Sanji and Nami and Usopp can help too, but as you all saw, we're not undefeatable. We aren't the only ones in our league, and when we fight, it can get close. Just look at Zoro. He won, but he almost died. He can still barely talk. It can't always be up to us to handle the fights. You guys need to do it too. For God's sakes, that's why we have an armada, so we can all help each other when the fight goes down. And I need to be sure that you guys are up to the challenge. Luffy looked down on them all, and the weight of his expectation fell on each of them. The Arlong pirates are fishmen. They can breathe underwater and are 10 times stronger than humans. But that doesn't mean shit if you worked hard enough. I'm 10 times stronger than Buggy or Jin, but that's because I earned it. I bled and sweat for that power. But if I pigged out and did nothing for a year while they worked for it, they could beat me easy. Listen, Arlong's gang might be from the Grand Line, but for the past 8 years, they've done nothing. All they've done is hide out on Nami's island and terrorize ordinary humans. They've gotten soft. But you guys, Luffy grinned with pride, you guys have been working so hard. You've done everything I've asked without complaint, because you know it's important to get ready for the Grand Line. You can take Arlong's crew, and if you can't, then it won't because they were fishmen and you were human. It will be because you didn't fight hard enough, didn't want it enough, because you gave up. The men were almost in tears. I don't want to hurt your feelings. I love you guys. We're Nakama. I'm just trying to tell the truth. Luffy took a breath. You need this fight, boys. You need to prove to me that you're ready for what lies ahead. But even more important, you need to prove to yourselves that you're ready. You need to see what all this training is for. You need to see what it's like to fight an enemy above your level and overcome them because you have to. Because losing is not an option. Because if you lose, then that bastard is going to hurt your Nakama. You need to prove that you're worthy to carry the name of Straw Hat. You came to me as different crews, Buggy, Black Cat, Krieg. But now, in your hearts, you are all the same. We fight with one mind. Our blood beats with one heart. We are Nakama. A many-voiced roar of pride shattered the night. So tell me, boys, what are you going to do to those Arlong bastards that made an AMI cry? Kick their asses, spoke the Armada. We're going to avenge Nami-sama, shouted Shemp. We will prove ourselves to the dawn, proclaimed Pearl. And give those stinking fishmen jerks the boot, yelled Butcheye, almost feral. And we'll have the victory feast piping hot and waiting for you, proclaimed Karn. Viva la revolution. Poor Elamer, cried Sanji, visibly steaming. Usopp shot off some fireworks into the sky, which only riled the men up more. This was no longer a party. It was the eve of war. As Luffy nodded, satisfied his speech hadn't failed, he turned to Nami. She was looking at him with an unexplainable expression. What? Do I have something on my face? Is hat crooked? Luffy reached up to pat his head. Nami shook her head. This is going to sound weird, but you'd have been a damn good Marine. The fact their blood was boiling didn't change the fact that a large percentage of it was alcohol. Plus it was important to get sleep for the fight ahead, so the men settled down and fell asleep by one. Some of the Buggy pirates thought they were still dreaming when Luffy woke them only to say that there would be no training today. Luffy told them and the other crews as he woke them to mentally prepare. Today was game day. Each ship enjoyed breakfast and coffee to help with the hangovers, prepared by the Barady cook assigned to their ship for the day. It had been deemed impractical to have each crew actually go aboard the Barady each meal time, especially when the ships were moving, so the staff had been put on a rotation of the ships, except for Sanji, who handled all things Straw Hat crew in the food department. It worked out, since Zeph needed his men to actually sail his boat. He'd been in a pirate mine when he had it made, so it was almost as fast as Mary despite the weight and unusual shape. But the steering was tricky and required half his cooks working full-time paddling the bikes that powered the mechanism that worked the tail. It was a win-win situation, since his men needed to build some serious leg power to make his fighting style work. Once they finished eating, the captains were summoned to Mary's galley for a planning session. Zoro wearily greeted Buggy, Django, and Jin before returning to his nap. He hadn't even kicked up a fuss when he'd been told in no uncertain terms he wasn't going to participate in the fighting on Kami Island. Even he couldn't shrug off this much damage. It helped that Kaya actually had chains to threaten him with. Okay, boys, let's begin. Nami unrolled a large map of Kami Island, with all the villages clearly marked. She pulled out a variety of colored paperweights, courtesy of Usopp. Our target is the Arlong pirate crew. The captain is Arlong himself, and he focuses on using his fishman abilities in combat. His officers are Kirubai, a karate master, Chu, a long-distance fighter, and Hakai, a swordsman. There's roughly 80 crew members under them. They all spend most of their time here in Arlong Park. Nami placed 4 of the marks on a spot on the map. However, at any given moment, at least 10 are out on patrol. These are the usual routes. She marked some X's on spots near the coast and made lines to show the route of each man. It's worth mentioning that he has the local marine captain bribed. Here's my plan. We stash the ships in this cove, between Kakuyashi and Gosa. I report to Arlong, act as if everything's fine. The Black Cats will show if they've learned any stealth and goes through the forest. And take out the patrols, preferably quietly. I will lure Arlong here, to my family's Tangerine Grove. When he leaves, the Dawn and Buggy crews storm the park, with the Black Cats providing reinforcements if they finish in time. By the time Arlong gets back, the fight should be over or close enough. when he goes ballistic, and he will, Luffy steps in to knock him down. What happened to us taking on Arlong? Buggy asked. That was to inspire the men. You didn't honestly expect me to let you guys take on a former officer of the Sun Pirates, did you? Luffy raised a brow. Buggy looked away, blushing. Nami rolled her eyes. Luffy will stay with the ships and use his observation to keep tabs on everything. If anything gets FUBAR, he can be there fast enough to intervene. Usopp and Kaya will go to Arlong Park to provide support, Sanji will keep an eye out for the Marines, and Gaiman and the Bear-80 will guard the fleet. Those cute animals are on guard duty, Jin asked skeptically. Appearances are deceiving. They've all been mimicking the crews in training, and Moji has taught them how to fight. They can handle themselves. Add that to Red Leg Zeph himself, and we're safe. Django pursed his lips. Seems like a decent enough plan. Though I don't know whether to feel relieved or insulted that my guys are responsible for only 10 while the others are charging the fort. The fight at Arlong Park is going to be loud and messy. You're expected to take down these scouts without any of them raising the alarm. You'll need to coordinate to take them down fast and hard. The guards all have baby Den mushies with a direct line to Arlong. Yes, you have Luffy as a safety net, but this is supposed to be a field test of how you'll do in the Grand Line. And there's sometimes sensitive stuff our Nakama are involved in Paradise, so we don't have time to wait. Buggy launched his hands at the ceiling. What the hell is with these Nakama of yours? How do you have this information? I'm still trying to puzzle out how Sanji knew you guys since based on everything I've heard. He's never left that restaurant since Seth-sama built it. And there's still 4 more, if Luffy wasn't lying when I first asked. Who are they and where are they, exactly? Usopp tickled his chin. Well, we're meeting our doctor on Drum Island, our archaeologist on Arabasta or perhaps Whiskey Peak, our shipwright in Water 7 and our musician. For some reason, Usopp went pale as the crewmate he was about to name. Yeah, so don't worry about that stuff. It's our little secret. Buggy huffed and let it go. Forget it, it's not worth the headache. This seems simple enough. When do we reach the island? 2 hours. Do whatever you guys do to pump up your crews before a fight. Nami waved them out before turning on Usopp. Okay, what is it? Usopp looked to be fighting tears. Brook, what about him? Sanji asked. Luffy's lips had thinned to a line. After 50 years in the darkness, 50 years with nothing but his memories to keep him company. He got 1 month with us. Then he got separated from us for 2 whole years. And then, after finally getting back together with us for barely another 2 weeks, he woke up back on that ship, with absolutely no concrete proof that it wasn't all a dream. Kaya covered her mouth. How horrible. Nami and Sanji looked like they'd been punched in the gut. Luffy sighed. I thought about that. And there's no way Frankie or Robin went to get him, because he's still missing his shadow. I'm not saying they couldn't take on Moria, but they wouldn't take the risk. It would change too much, and they couldn't have known we were all sent back. He clenched his fists so tight they went white. The truth is, I'm not sure what state Brook will be in when we meet him. He was so lonely before we found him. This might have been the final straw. He might have. Correct. Don't say that. Nami screamed. Luffy didn't react to her. I'm hoping Chopper will know some way to fix him. I even thought about bringing Laboon with us to meet him, but when we got to Sabayati he'd have the same problem as he does at Reverse Mountain, and having to separate again would probably do more harm than good. Zoro forced his eyes open. He'll be okay. He's miserable right now, but he's fine. He's a straw hat. He knows we're coming for him. Thus spoke the great Marimo, Sanji muttered. Anyway, we need to get ready. Let's just put it out of our minds and hope for the best. For all we know he beat that zombie that had his shadow and he's waiting for us with Laboon. Man, that would be a dream come true. Literally. Usopp sighed and went out. After one last check on Zoro, Kaya followed. It looked like her boyfriend needed some comforting. Sanji went outside for a smoke. Luffy gave Nami a hand on Nami's shoulder in silent support and left. The woman sighed and looked down at the map, alone but for Zoro's snores. Time to face her demons. Again, the ships made good time. The usual antics of the crews muted in light of the ordeal ahead. The chimney of the Bear-80 was already releasing smoke, meat simmering for the victory feast. It was an optimistic gesture, but also a self-fulfilling prophecy. The men would fight to the last breath just so they could earn the right to eat that food. Land ho! Shouted the lookout from the Bezin Black, alerting the armada. Everyone looked up from their jobs to glance at the horizon, where Nami's homeland and the lair of their toughest enemy yet was just visible. It was then that the men got their first taste of the Grand Line. With no warning, an explosion seemed to happen in the sea right next to the Bear-80. Bose moi, shouted Mayasa. As the water settled, it became clear that there was some creature hidden within the spray. It cleared to reveal what appeared to be a cow, only with green spots instead of black, and a scaled belly. Its maw was open, showing that unlike its land-based counterpart, it wasn't an herbivore, as evidenced by the many serrated teeth. If the many strings of saliva dripping from them were any indication, it was hungry. Moo. What the hell is that? Shouted Siam. It's a sea cow. There's a family of sea kings that look like land animals, but they're unique to the Grand Line. Arlong must have brought it along with him. Buggy answered, his eyes wide. Nami, something you forgot to mention? Oh yeah, that's Momu, Arlong's pet. Nami shrugged, totally unconcerned. Must have slipped my mind. How could that monster have possibly slipped your mind? Buggy demanded. Moji tapped his captain's shoulder. Captain, did you forget we have a bigger monster? Buggy turned to see Momu no longer looming over the Barady, looking a second from attacking. Instead, he was sunk in the water down to his head, eyes wide, looking at Luffy, who was holding up his hand in a stop motion. The light seemed to be bending weirdly around them, a physical hint at the presence of Haki. Your name is Momu? Luffy asked, as if afraid one twitch in the wrong direction would bring about his certain doom. Momu nodded slowly. You have a choice to make, Momu. Choose between me and Arlong. If you choose me, I will make you my pet. I will feed you and love you and give you a family. If you choose Arlong, I will make you lunch. Momu shivered. This two legs was even smaller than Arlong, but somehow he was more scared than he'd ever been in his life. He didn't want to get eaten. Taking a breath, he flipped over, going belly up. By putting himself in such a helpless position, he showed his submission. Luffy grinned and dropped the aura. That was the fastest that had ever happened. Then again, it wasn't fair comparing the comparatively gentle sea cow to the monsters of Rusukana. He reached out to rub the aquatic bovine's belly. Good boy. Stretching behind him, Luffy plucked Gaiman by the hair and dragged him over. Ignoring the harumph of the box man, Luffy spoke to the righted Momu. This is Gaiman. He's going to take care of you and show you how my pets should act. That done, Luffy hopped back to Mary. Seeing the faces of most of the other three crews all staring at him, Luffy tilted his head. What? They one and all hung their heads. Their captain was a monster among monsters. Nami sighed. You get used to it, boys. That or have a manic episode. Luffy rolled his eyes. Whatever. I'll be napping and listening. So saying, he laid back on his special seat, plopped hat on his face, and went still. In short order, Nami had navigated them to the cove. It was a tight fit, but that was the price of privacy. No patrols came to this cove because it was too small to easily maneuver out. The Barady staff took a break from feast prep to wave goodbye to the crews, gathered on the beach. Nami took a moment to check up on her climate act. She'd only finished all the tinkering last night and she didn't want to miss anything. Weather eggs loaded. Check. Alloy strengthened. Check. Heat, cold, and shock gates modified. Check. How did I pay for borrowing and slightly destroying Usopp's tools in the process? Check. Her inspection done. Nami twirled her trusty miracle baton a few times before breaking apart and clipping the segments to her belt. All right, Nami shouted, ceasing the chatter. She was back in the forest camo tank she'd worn the first time to help her get in character. Black Cats, search and destroy. Dawn and Buggy set up the ambush. Usopp and Kaya, make sure they don't get killed. Sanji-kun, keep an eye out for the rat. Ready, break. Good luck. Kick some fishman ass. Patty called out. You're a very special animal. Yes, you are, Gaiman cooed, all his attention on Momo. Luffy gave a tiny snore. With that, Operation Shark Hunt was a go. Nami walked down the dirt path she knew so well, feeling a curious mixture of giddiness and dread coil in her belly. She could hear the rustling as the two crews shadowed her through the trees, waiting for when Arlong left and they could attack the park. Really, there was no reason to be nervous. As opposed to last time, they had the numbers, the knowledge, and she herself could probably take on Arlong and win with her sorcery climb attack. Victory was all but assured. So why did she have this sinking feeling that something was going to go wrong? Before long, she had reached the gates of Arlong Park. She looked up at the tower where she'd spent so many unhappy years. She took a deep breath, reaching for the mask she'd made to survive among her tormentors. As she reached forward for the handle, something glinted at the corner of her eye. On reflex, she turned, hoping to find a coin or dropped piece of jewelry. Nature had not been kind to the corpse. The sun had already baked the moisture out of the skin, giving it the leathery tone of a mummy, though the lividity marks suggested it was reasonably fresh. Crows had already picked out the eyes, their sharp talons leaving harsh scratch marks on the delicate skin surrounding the now gaping sockets. The wriggling forms of maggots squirmed along the ragged tier of the throat, the clear cause of death. The body couldn't have been 4 feet tall. It was just a child, a male child. Nami felt her gorge rise and forced it down. The bile burned her throat, but she felt she deserved the pain. The old memory rose up clear as day. When she'd returned the first time, there had been a boy, filled with impotent rage at his father's murder. He'd come with his little dagger to kill Arlong. She'd knocked him aside, scolding him, sending him running. She had saved his life, even if he hadn't realized it at the time. How much difference could 2 days make? Tears filled Nami's eyes, clouding her vision, but still she could see the corpse of the poor boy. It was tattooed on the backs of her eyelids, seared into her brain. How could she have been so arrogant? She'd been so certain everything would work out perfectly because she knew how it was going to happen. She was from the future. She'd already lived it once. But that future was the sum of a million circumstances aligning to make it so. One little detail left out would have resulted in a different outcome. How much could 2 days change? Everything, to a grief-mad child from Gosa. She didn't even know his name. How long she stood there frozen, she didn't know. But eventually she found her way back to herself. She dried her eyes and felt something harden inside her. In a way, she was responsible for this. She'd procrastinated, not pushing the trip to her island out of concern for Zoro. But the world didn't stop for her and her crew. Their lives weren't a fairy tale or epic or some damn manga. Happy endings weren't guaranteed. So she was damn well going to have to make her own. Turning away from what was left of the boy, she opened the gates. She'd wasted enough time. There was a plan, and she had to play her part. "Ah, Nami, how nice to see you. I was getting worried there. It's been so long," Arlong called out. That mocking grin of his glinting in the sun. Nami felt a smile just as false cover her face. "Give me a break, Arlong. I predict the weather, I don't control it. I hit a bad patch and it slowed me down." "Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. I'd hate to have had to incentivize you over a bit of bad luck," Arlong drawled, a sadistic glint in his eye. Nami resisted the urge to blast the bastard into West Blue courtesy of Lightning Chan. This was a test for her nakama, not a chance for her to relive her vengeance. "Whatever, I trust things were all quiet back here." Arlong shrugged. "Nothing major. Some goody two-shoes Marines came to try and stop me. We took them down easy thanks to your sea charts. We moved a boulder and sunk them with a whirlpool." Arlong then grinned even wider. "Oh, and I had to pay a visit to your old home. Turns out that crazy old man Jen was planning a rebellion. He had a whole stockpile of dangerous weapons. Shahahaha. Well, he won't be causing any more trouble now. I made sure of that." Something in Nami's head went click. Surely she hadn't heard that right. She must have misheard. Because if she hadn't, then she was going to do something ill-advised, like run headfirst into a sturdy wall, or bite out Arlong's heart. Time enough to check on that later. Now was game time. Arlong raised up his hands. "Yo, everyone, Nami's back." With a cheer, an aquarium of fishmen burst out of the 3 pools of Arlong Park. A party was soon underway and Nami found herself smiling and chuckling and trading small talk with the creatures she was forced to call friend. She still had this odd sense that something world-shattering had happened, but it couldn't have been that important if she couldn't remember it, right? When she'd reached her quota of false enthusiasm, she turned to Arlong. "Oh, by the way, I have the 100 million. Arlong froze. Slowly, he turned to face Nami. His face oddly slack. "Really? You hadn't mentioned you were getting close. Why bother alerting you until I had the full amount? This trip was especially profitable. I've got it all stashed back at my old house. Won't you come with me to check it out? After all, our deal is to show you 100 million Buri, right? So come with me so I can show you." Nami's grin was wide, her tone carefully kept clean of sarcasm. No need to piss him off until all his reinforcements were taken care of. Arlong forced a smile, though his eyes burned with rage. Indeed it was. "Well, let's not waste any time. Let's go see this 100 million Buri." Shu spoke up. "Shu, actually, I'll leave with you. It's been a while since the patrols reported and I want to make sure those lazy bums haven't fallen asleep." The 3 walked out the gates, the tension a palpable weight. The moment the gates closed, the crew of renegade fishmen broke out into concerned chatter. "Nayu, this is bad. If Nami-chan can show Arlong she has the money, then there's no way he can't let her go. And then his dream of conquering the East Blue with her maps will be ruined. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? What are we going to do?" Hachai panicked, his 6 arms flailing. "Calm down, you drama king crab," Hirubai snapped. "Arlong-sama will find some way to wiggle out of this. Then it's just a quick call to that greedy little captain and the problem's solved." That's right," Hachai noted, slapping 3 fists down on 3 palms. "Still, it's kind of odd how it came out of nowhere like that. You'd think Nami-sen would be bragging about finally being rid of us." "Did she seem any different before she left on her last trip?" asked one of the grunts. "Now that you mention it, she did seem to have an odd spring in her step. She had this huge smile on her face, not one of those fake ones when we have our parties," remarked another. Hirubai narrowed his eyes. "And she had a new weapon on her this time. Her staff was metal, not wood. Maybe her old one broke," offered an underling. "And she replaced it with a more expensive one. That's not like her. And she did show up very late. The deadline's today, and she usually leaves herself a cushion of at least a day. She said she hit a bad patch." Hachai spoke up. "There hasn't been any typhoons reported in the paper. Anything less she'd be able to see coming and avoid." "Something doesn't smell right about this," growled the most paranoid of Arlong's officers. "You're overthinking this, aren't you, Kurubai-san?" challenged an older crewmate with glasses and already pink in the cheeks. At that precise moment, the entire outside wall of the park went down in a cloud of dust and rubble. "What the hell?" shouted the shocked fishman. The dust cleared to reveal a line of men in two distinct groups, one looking like an asylum had joined the circus, the other all looking like they could do with a few extra meals. Leading the pack was a clown with a giant red rubber nose twirling a number of knives through his hands and a guy holding up tonfa that seemed to have cannonballs on the ends. Knock knock, rasped the tonfa man. Special delivery to Arlong Park. One ass kicking. What the hell are all you humans doing here? Growled Kirubai. The clown let loose a laugh that made nails dragged down a chalkboard seem like golden bells. For the crimes of torturing the nakama of Buggy the Clown, I hereby sentence you all to a flashy execution. He raised a hand and called over his shoulder. For the Armada. For the captain. For NAMI. For NAMI. Roared the crowd of men. And with no more preamble than that, Arlong Park was under attack. Meanwhile, 3 fishmen were hanging out on the dock near Gosa. Technically, they were on watch for any ships that could notice them and raise the alarm on Arlong's presence on the island. But once the economy of the island had dried up under the strain of Arlong's tributes, the ships had stopped coming on their own. Hey, shouldn't Nami be coming back today? One of them thought aloud. Yeah, unless she's gotten bitter and she's staying away so Arlong-sama will kill off those villagers that curse her out. The third one laughed. It's all so tragic. She's doing all this to save them and they think she betrayed them. It's like one of those cheesy plays. Wow. The 3 looked up, their boring afternoon broken by some wimpy yell. They turned and saw the strangest human they'd ever seen. He had green hair and some girly hairstyle, gloves with what looked like claws on the ends, a thick fur coat and a pair of shorts that barely cleared his knee, showing off his unshaved legs. He was running straight at them, his eyes closed, his arms flailing, and doing some kind of wobbling movement with his legs. Wah, I'm going to beat you guys up, he shouted, sounding like a little kid charging the bully twice his size. The anglerfish fishman tilted his head, his antenna bobbing. What the hell? What's with this idiot? Whined the second. Looks weak, even for a human, the third scoffed. At that moment, the man opened his eyes, and they were glinting with malevolent mischief. Appearances can be deceiving, he purred. Then he suddenly tripled in speed, and by the time the fishmen realized that he was in their personal space, he'd already jumped back. What the heck? He's fast. I better tell Arlong-sama. The leader reached into his pocket and clutched empty air. What? Where's the den mushy? Oh, so sorry. Are these yours? The human asked with saccharine concern, holding up 3 sleeping baby snails in his hands. Give those back and I'll let you keep your teeth. Human, growled one of the fishmen. The man tilted his head. I think you're confused. It's the cat that eats the fish, not the other way around. 6 men suddenly burst out of the water, heaving themselves onto the deck. Before the fishmen could even move, 2 of them had been tackled, stabbed, and subdued by 3 each of the strangers in cat costumes. Guys, cried out the third, looking back in horror. You should be looking up, came a yell from above. The fishman had a brief impression of a cow before consciousness left him with a very painful crunch. Siam walked up to his brother to pat him on the back. Nice catapult there, Butchai. The tuxedo cat man grinned and held up a fist for his brother to bump. You did good too. You were almost fast as Cap. I mean Kuro when you picked those guys' pockets. Oh, you're just saying that. The second greenhead of the Armada looked at the other 2 fishmen, now getting tied up by the smug nakama that had ambushed them. And congrats to you guys. You took these 2 down like it was nothing. Are these guys really naturally stronger than us? It doesn't matter if you can lift mountains or jump over the moon. With the element of surprise, we are all equally vulnerable. The black cats turned to see their captain coming over to them with his distinctive walk. Excellent job, Nyaban brothers. Abraham, Giuseppe, Casey, O'Malley, Toulouse, and Berlioz. Django nodded to each of his men in turn. I'm sure all the other teams took down their weird targets as well as you guys did. They all grinned. They all knew that managing to sneak attack and outnumber an enemy hardly proved they were all that strong. But the fact that the enemies were Grand Line veterans, albeit gone to seed, was an excellent confidence boost. Django cleared his throat. Everyone should be done by now. I guess we should all head over to the park to watch the captain kick these weirdos' boss. That should be fun to watch. The black cats had barely taken a step before their cheerful mood was soiled. Captain Jango, help us, help. They all turned to see one of their nakama, dragging the bloody bodies of 2 of his fellows, collapse to the ground from what looked like a bullet wound. Behind him, walking at a leisurely pace, was a fishman that was to lips as Usopp was to noses. There was no mistaking the hatred in his eyes. How curious, the stranger remarked in a lisping falsetto. I come to see why all the scouts seem to have fallen asleep, and find them ganged up on by some deviant humans. You certainly don't see that every day. Django gave a weak smirk. Based on Nami's information, this was Chu, one of Arlong's officers, and he wasn't unsuspecting. He was ready for a fight. Part of him wanted to run for the hills. But that image was quickly supplanted by the image of his captain smiling. Luffy had faith in him. Now it was time to earn that. What can I say? We were hungry for some tuna and found some walking around on 2 legs. We just had to try it. Chu's eyes flashed with murderous intent. I was already going to kill you for harming my brethren. But for that little wisecrack, I'm going to make it slow. Django started to twirl one of his chakram around his finger. When he's distracted, grab the guys and make for the park. Get them to Kayasama and Kadu. But Captain, how are you going to beat this guy? He looks tough and you don't have the drop on him. Siam bit his lip. Django turned and tilted his sunglasses, giving his nakama a droll look. Please, like I could lose to this weirdo. Insolent human, spat Chu. Apparently he had good hearing. Water gun, he shouted before spitting with such speed and pressure that it was as good as a bullet. Django dodged with style, moving his head out of the way by going into his disco pose, his finger pointing behind him as he looked at the ground. He looked up into the outraged face of Chu. Denied. Sorry, but cats hate getting wet. While Chu was busy being offended, Django reached into his coat for one of his chakram and flung it at Chu. The marksman dodged lest his lips get separated from his body. Django didn't let up, sending a constant stream of bladed discs at Chu while the others grabbed Chu's victims and booked for Arlong Park. Enough of this. Chu pulled off one last dodge and dived into the ocean. Django immediately ran off into the trees. Like hell, I'm just going to stand there in view of the water. Let the prey come to you. He patted his pockets and sweat dropped. Just as well that he did that, I guess. I got so caught up I forgot to keep count. I'm out. He looked down to his last remaining chakram, the one he used for hypnosis hanging on a string. Don't let me down, buddy. After a few minutes, Chu hopped out of the ocean. He was comically distended from all the water he'd swallowed, but it was no laughing matter. Where'd that puny human go? He muttered, scanning the environment. He paused when he spotted a flash of color. He spent a minute staring at the purple sticking out from behind a tree. He can't possibly think he's camouflaged in that. Rolling his eyes, Chu readied his diaphragm and let loose. 100-shot water gun. He roared before making like a turret. The foliage was torn to shreds by the water. When it finally died down, it looked like a team of termites on drugs had torn through the thick patch of trees. Chu huffed. Chu, that takes care of that. I live, shouted Django, rising from a mound of leaves like a vampire from a coffin, his arms held out before him. When he was vertical, he tore off the shreds of his coat and blew the ruin of his hat off his head with an upward exhale. Other than the damage to his wardrobe, he seemed to have escaped the assault with little more than grazes. Looks like I need new clothes. They were tacky anyway. Chu snarled. Do you mock me? What are you even doing here? You some kind of mercenary the islanders hired. Django chuckled. Nope, nothing like that. Captain Django of the Black Cat Pirates. Nice to meet you. Chu narrowed his eyes. What are you doing here then? Thought if you beat Arlong Sama you'd get a reputation boost. Not at all. Let's just say you fishmen weirdos hurt the friend of a friend. We came along to help him pay you guys back. Chu threw his head back and laughed. You threw your lives away for that. How stupid are you? Django froze. If there was one thing you should never call him, it was stupid. Hiro had called him stupid on a daily basis, when Django knew for a fact he was above average intelligence at least. Hypnosis wasn't as simple as waving something back and forth. It required an intense knowledge of psychology and the human body, so he knew what limits he could push, and a certain focus and mental presence that came with intense practice to slip past people's mental defenses. His art was a demanding one. Not something any idiot could do, and he was a master. He was not stupid. Call me stupid. One more time, Django growled, his voice sub-zero. Chu sneered. Stupid. Stupid, stupid, stupid. When the stupid people of the world gather, you're their king. What you going to do about it, human? Tigers with empty bellies grinned at helpless deer the way Django grinned at Chu. He brought up his ring and set it swinging. When I say 1, 2, Django, you won't be able to see or hear me. You resorting to party tricks. How pathetic can you get? Chu growled. 1, 2, Django. The hypnotist intoned. Chu blinked and the man vanished. Huh, where'd he go? Chu carefully scanned the environment, but he couldn't find hide nor hair of the weird human. Must have run off while I was distracted. Pathetic weakling. But what more could you expect from me? Chu's back bowed and his eyes went white as a searing white pain flashed through his spine. As he collapsed to the ground, his back gushing blood, Django flicked the liquid off his ring. That's what you get for calling me stupid. You weirdo. Remember, Pearl-san, everyone bleeds. It's not the end of the world to get injured, as long as you keep fighting. Some girls actually love scars. You shouldn't be so scared of bodily harm, Kaya soothed, dabbing the minor cut on the shield fighter's arm. The man had managed to take down a half a dozen fishmen before he'd been benched for fear he'd go pyromaniac. All right, and fire would hurt my nakama. I'll try to remember that, the man whispered, looking haunted. Usopp rolled his eyes as he discouraged yet another fishman from attacking the first aid area. This guy's got a serious problem. What the hell happened to him? Krieg found him in a jungle. Apparently he'd been abandoned as a kid. He'd developed this reflex of starting a fire when he got hurt to scare away animals. He was strong as a gorilla, so Krieg slapped some shields on him and made him the second mate, explained a Dawn pirate as Kadu finished splinting his leg. The fight was going pretty well, all told. Buggy and Dawn pirates each teamed up to take down individual fishmen, like a pack of wolves downing a bear. Though even glancing blows from the other species was enough to get a man sent to Kaya and Kadu, the crews were able to dodge and distract without getting too much in each other's way. The officers and captains, on the other hand, were doing perfectly fine fighting solo. "Look, Richie, dinner," Moji shouted, using his whip to trip the fishmen that ran screaming from the slobbering lion pouncing after them. "Feel the wrath of my acrobatic swordplay," Kabaji yelled as he dashed through the crowd on his unicycle, using all Zoro had taught him to slash down the Arlong pirates. "Barabaru rice cracker," Buggy shouted, sending his lower half spinning at Hachai. The octopus fishman slashed with all 6 of his swords, practically Julianing Buggy's legs. But the blade sticking out of his shoe and the sharpened tip of his peg leg still found their way into his flesh. "Nayu, that's cheating, you bastard. My 6-sword style doesn't work on you." Buggy laughed. "Hello, pirate. There's no such thing as cheating for someone like me." Hachai frowned. "Well, if that's the way you feel." Taking a deep breath, the swordsman shouted Taco Hachai Black, as he let loose with the ink his species was known for. "Whoa," Buggy yelled as he split vertically to avoid the jet of coal-black liquid. As he came back together, a look of disgust flashed across his face. Did you seriously just puke at me as an attack?" Hachai grinned. "That's the wonder of my fishman heritage. Just look at all my lovely arms. Aren't I marvelous?" he asked as he went into something that vividly reminded Buggy of Sanji when a woman called his name. Bara Bara Festival. Buggy's body suddenly burst apart into dozens of different pieces. "And now my ultimate attack, Bara Bara Chainsaw." With that, every piece of Buggy started to spin so fast it blurred. When Buggy finally had mercy, it looked like someone had stuck Hachai in a blender. He slowly collapsed forward, eyes blank. "I don't know who's crazier, Usopp for coming up with the idea or me for letting him stick them in." The clown turned to see Jin avoid another palm strike from his own opponent. Despite the sheer weight of his weapons, Jin's style was actually quite agile. He'd worked out over time exactly how to use the cannonball tonfa and their momentum as counterweights to allow him to pull off some truly impressive gymnastics. He needed every bit of it to dodge the strikes of Kurubai. The Ray Fishman tried to hide his panting, clinging to bravado. "You have no hope of besting me, puny human. I'm a level 40 Fishman karate master. One blow from me would be enough to kill you." Jin huffed. "I heard you the 12th time. And you still haven't managed to actually land a blow, have you?" Kurubai scowled. "Insolence. Do you not realize that your rebellion goes against the will of heaven? Fishmen are simply superior to humans. This whole fight is an exercise in futility." "I'll agree with you on that one. If this is the best you got, there's no way you can beat me." Jin grinned. "And I have it on good authority that I'm more devil than man, so you might want to rethink your whole eugenic spiel." Kurubai's eye twitched. He slipped into a stance. "I'll show you the hopelessness of your struggle. My 1,000 tile true punch is the true essence of Fishman karate, and capable of ending you with barely a touch." Instead of a cowering human, he got a cannonball to his jaw. Kurubai's last thought was that the stars had come out early as he fell back on the ground, his teeth landing beside him. Jin rolled his eyes. "Can't believe he left me an opening like that. How long has it been since these guys were in an actual fight?" Looking around, it was clear the fight was over. Every fishman was down on the ground, dead to the world, while the Armada, while sporting some pretty big boo-boos, were all still alive and kicking. What do we do now?" asked Shemp. Usopp cleared his throat. "We all get the hell out of Ground Zero and find good spots for the show, gentlemen. Arlong's going to be spitting mad when he sees what we've done to his chumps, and Luffy's going to teach him not to mess with his nakama. Now, we need volunteers to carry the wounded. Remember who your buddy is. Try to limp in a single file line." Nami felt like she was walking through a ghost town as she led Arlong through Kakoyashi. A visit from a fishman was enough to make people keep their head down. But this total absence was unusual. The odd weight in her mind gave a little twitch, waiting for her to acknowledge, and again she ignored it. Before she knew it, they were at Bellamir's Grove. She led her childhood nightmare to the secret compartment and lifted it up, revealing the first 100 million she'd gathered within 6 months of waking up in the past. She kept her eye on Arlong. She'd imagined this moment so many times, back when she was naive enough to believe Arlong would stay true to the spirit of his vow as well as the letter. Arlong's eyes quickly surveyed the pile of cash, jewels, and gold. He'd never imagined she'd actually be able to pull it off. Figured she'd be as good a thief as she was a cartographer. "I'm impressed, Nami. This all is certainly worth a great deal of money." Nami raised a brow. "But," Arlong grinned. Good, she wasn't overreacting. He'd hate to make this difficult. I asked for 100 million biri, as in cash. I've no doubt all this collateral will fetch a pretty penny, but I'm afraid you haven't quite met the conditions of our agreement. Nami grinned genially. She hadn't expected anything less, but she still felt a surge of anger at how determined the bastard was to own her. I see. Well, I'll see to that on my next trip. I'm sure I'll get all I need. You do that. In the meantime, there's some fresh charts waiting in your room. With that, Arlong turned to head back to the park. He didn't even wait until he was out of sight before he pulled out the Den Den mushi. As Nami lowered the lid, she saw Nijiko come out of the house towards her. Turning to face her sister, Nami felt a real grin split her lips. Hey, there's some minor details to work out, but we'll be free by sunset. It wasn't even a lie. That's great, Nijiko said, her lips twitching, but otherwise not reacting. Nami noticed her sister was oddly subdued. Nijiko, what's wrong? Her sister in all but blood looked into her eyes. Nami noticed they were bloodshot with bags under them. Did he tell you about Jen-san? The bluehead asked. The words were like a key to the lock holding Nami's pain back. She staggered as the horrible realization that Jen-san, the neighbor that had scolded her for stealing, who had endured such terrible injuries trying to protect her, who had been the only man to make Bellamere smile, was gone. He was gone, and he wasn't supposed to be. He was supposed to hug her and have some guy talk with Luffy and yell after her when she stole his wallet during her big exit. But they'd been 2 days late. Usopp hadn't been there to distract Arlong. Jen had managed to convince the villagers not to rebel, sacrificing himself for their war of patience. Arlong had snapped his neck for owning an antique pistol that was more likely to take your hand than hit the target of fire. Arlong had taken her father from her too. In her old life, when she'd felt like her life was falling apart around her, she'd broken down in tears. But she wasn't that pathetic little girl anymore. Nami steadied herself. Where is he? Nijiko's eyes widened. There was murder in her little sister's eyes. We buried him next to Bellamere. It's what she would have wanted. With a nod, Nami turned and made her way to the bluff. The ground swiftly vanished under her feet, hate lending her an energy she'd never known. In what felt like seconds, she was standing before the familiar, weather-worn cross. The larger one next to it was new, and the earth was fresh in a square where they'd dug. A pinwheel was planted in the ground between the two graves, turning in the wind. Nami bowed her head and thought of the good times. She'd been a rebellious child, but she'd had people tough yet gentle enough to correct her without smothering her. She remembered Bellamere admiring her first map and Jen telling her Bellamere's story over a cup of hot chocolate. They were both gone, but she'd always have the memories. And they'd both been taken by the same person. The same one that had caused her so much pain, robbed her of her childhood, stolen the hope of her people. Feeling her fury coalesce into a single word, Nami threw back her head and cried it to the sky. Arlong. The next instant, 2 men appeared on the slope. Nami Swan, what's wrong? Did someone hurt you? Where is he? I'll make a custard from his bones, Sanji ranted, hovering near his beloved Nami, but hanging back on seeing the practically visible waves of anger flowing off her. Nami, Luffy asked, his voice calm, his eyes concerned. Nami turned, and both men almost gasped. They recognized the fire in her eyes. They'd seen it in each other. It was the light of one about to go to war. Sanji-kun, she stated. Arlong called Nezumi. When he shows up, express my displeasure at his idiocy in trying to steal my treasure. Sanji merely nodded. As you wish, he answered. Her gaze turned to Luffy. Change of plans, Captain. I'm going to take down Arlong. Got a problem with that? Luffy adjusted hat. Nope. That done, Nami turned and began striding with violent purpose. As she passed Nijiko, who'd followed after her, the older girl raised a brow. Where'd those two come from? Arlong gaped, unable to believe what he was seeing. His brethren, those that understood their rightful place as he did, were strewn like dummies across his beloved park. This was impossible. No one could have done this. Well, no one outside the Grand Line. But someone had. As Arlong gazed at his beaten comrades, feeling his horror fuel his rage, someone spoke to him. Arlong. The rogue captain turned to see Nami, her staff assembled and resting on her shoulder. Nami, I have no idea how this could have happened. It doesn't make any sense. But when I find those responsible, I swear, it was my crew. Arlong paused. He slowly turned and realized that Nami was looking at him like she was sizing up an opponent. The hilarity of the situation was lost in his anger. Your crew. Nami's lips curved into a smile hard as steel. I met the man who will become the Pirate King. He's a bit of an idiot, but he has a heart as big as his dream. And he has the strength and will to make it reality. He showed me things I never would have believed possible. I watched as he freed a country from a drought, felled a god, defied the world to save a friend, and vanquished a demon of blackest shadow. He bows his head to no man, whether king or noble or emperor. And along the way, he inspired me to find the same strength within myself. Spare me the poetry, Arlong hissed. Did you have anything to do with this? I distracted you so that his crew could beat yours. And now I'm here to kill you. Arlong couldn't contain his laughter. Shehahaha. Kill me. How many times have you tried in the past? Assassins, poison, none of it worked. That was before I had this, she said, twirling her staff and taking a two-handed grip. You think an iron staff will be that much better than a wooden one? Stop this nonsense now and I'll let some of your villagers live, Arlong growled. Nami narrowed her eyes. Gus soared. Next thing Arlong knew, he was flying through the air at incredible speeds. Before he could figure out how that happened, his flight was brought to a sharp stop by his back hitting the wall on the other side of Arlong Park, shaking his head of the cobwebs. Arlong looked up, determined to put Nami in her place, but she wasn't there. He looked left and right, but Nami had vanished. For today's forecast, came Nami's voice, oddly disembodied and echoing. The temperature is a brisk 54 degrees with scattered clouds. Humidity is low and conditions are stable, except for one area by the coast that is experiencing some freak weather phenomena. Beware of sudden shifts in temperature, gale force winds, and lightning strikes. Show yourself, witch, you're mine. I'm the only one that can use you properly. Stop resisting and accept your place as my navigator. Arlong's eyes were close to changing. I'm the navigator of the Straw Hat Pirates. Arlong's eyes widened as the whisper tickled past his ear. Before he could turn, he was sent flying forward again. He caught himself, turning to confront Nami. But she wasn't there. She wasn't anywhere. Where are you? How are you hiding? He roared, getting frustrated. Changes in air temperature refract light waves, resulting in a mirage. Before Arlong could puzzle that out, he felt another gust hit him. To his intense surprise, it blew him into the center pool of Arlong Park. Ha, you fool, Nami. You know as well as anyone that fishmen double in strength in the water. Now it will be simple to subdue. Arlong's monologue was cut off as his eyes crossed. His muscles seized, and he felt the metallic tingle of electricity pulse over his skin. Nami, her mirage tempo cancelled, looked dispassionately at the twitching shadow of Arlong in the water. Thunder egg, she muttered as she let loose another electric orb. Again the charge dissipated throughout the water. Again she watched him twitch, but it wasn't very satisfying. As angry as she wasn't a sadist, so she might as well make this quick. Weather egg, she cried, letting loose one of her precious orbs. Tornado breed tempo, she commanded. The shell cracked and a twisting whirlwind of opaque wind broke loose, quickly funneling down into the water. In seconds the tornado had become a waterspout, the form of Arlong visible as a shadow caught in the endless rotation. Cool egg, she commanded, taking the proper segment and releasing wave after wave of super cool spheres into the vortex. Before the eyes of her hidden spectators, the mass of wind and water hardened and coalesced until an iceberg floated inside Arlong Park. Arlong could be seen in the heart, body frozen in some twisted position by the forces that had acted on him as he'd frozen. Nami took a deep breath. Consider this my resignation. Black bowl. From the end of her climb attack came a string of bubbles containing a cloud black as coal. From peaceful skies appeared a monstrous thunder cloud. The kind seen only once or twice a century, the kind whose strikes were called the hand of God. And at Nami's command, it unleashed its fury. The thunderclap of the single strike that defeated Sawtooth Arlong was heard on the nearest island. Anyone unlucky enough to be looking directly at the bolt had to blink dots from their vision for hours. Meteorologists of East Blue eventually named it the strangest phenomenon to be recorded outside the Grand Line. Nami took her fill of the sight of Arlong, smoke leaking out his mouth, floating belly up in the water surrounded by chunks of ice. She collapsed her climb attack and turned away. She had avenged her mother and father. She was content. The armada slowly emerged from the trees, most of them with their jaws around their ankles and their eyes rolling in the grass behind them. Well, it wasn't Luffy, but we still got a hell of a performance. Brava, Usopp called. Larry, Shemp, Mo muttered. Yeah, buddy, they asked. One day, when I'm desperate for money and think of borrowing from Nami-sama, remind me of this moment, when I gave you permission to punch me in the balls if I ever take a single berry of her money. Agreed. Oh, great. Now I'm deaf in my good ear. Everyone's going to have to sign at me for a week. Kadu loudly complained as she put a bandage on one of the black cats that had joined them as they waited for Arlong's return. Kaya cleared her throat. Gentlemen, let this be a reminder to you all. Hell truly hath no fury like a woman scorned. For the sake of everyone's sanity, the tension was released by the resident buffoon. Inai Swan, you are the goddess of the winds and sea. Please allow this lowly mortal the divine privilege of rubbing the tension from your supple and smooth muscles. Everyone in hearing range rolled their eyes. Nami sighed before bringing up a hand to massage a crick in her neck. I'm so strung out, I might actually let you do that. For 50,000 a minute. Sanji looked like he could die happy at that moment as he oozed over to Nami to start fussing at the tiny injuries she'd gotten from flying debris. A pain moan made people look down to see the bloody form of some marine wearing a hat that looked like a mouse lying on the ground like a wet noodle. Well, I'd say this was a good day, spoke up Luffy, appearing from nowhere like Sanji. No one died. Everyone won their fights, and once we spread the news of Arbong's ass-kicked-ness, we're in for free food on top of what Mustache Man is making us. So are we ready for the grand line, Captain Luffy? Asked a Dawn pirate, eyes filled with nervous excitement. Luffy turned and grinned at his nakama. Hell yeah, Vermis. And that goes for all of you. The weary armada raised a cheer. Luffy turned to the limp form of the marine Sanji dragged there. Boy, he muttered, slapping the man's cheek. The rat bastard stirred. I'll get you for this. I am a marine captain. Touching me is a severe punishment. Tell it to someone who cares, Luffy muttered. Listen to me, you little weasel. I need you to deliver a message for me. A message, yes, in the newspaper article that goes with my bounty. I want you to print a certain message. What makes you think you'll get a bounty? Luffy raised a brow. I got Buggy the Clown and Django the Hypnotist to swear allegiance to me and join my armada, and got Devilman Jin to do the same after I beat Don Krieg with one blow. And my navigator just kicked Sawtooth Arlong into next week. That just proves you're some smooth talker. The thing with Krieg is apocryphal, and if anything that witch would get the bounty, not you. I've not seen or heard anything about you to makes you worth the Marine HQ's notice, Nezumi sneered, somehow looking down on someone standing over him. Luffy tilted his head. 1 second later, he was in the air above Arlong Park. Nezumi watched wide-eyed as his foot swelled to truly gigantic proportions and came down on the tower. Gamu Gamu no giant axe. The entire 5-story edifice vanished beneath the flesh of that giant foot attached to that small guy. As the foot swiftly returned to its normal size, Nezumi saw that where Arlong Park had been, there was now just a sheet of oddly colored dust and a crater that matched the exact contours of a foot. Luffy reappeared in a blur beside Nezumi. You were saying, nothing important, the corrupt captain squeaked. Now, again, when the poster for Straw Hat Luffy comes out, I want these exact words to be in the article. I'm listening. Nezumi glanced again at the crater where a minute ago there'd been a tower. Intently, Luffy grinned enigmatically. To the monster doctor, demon flower, pervert cyborg, and humming skeleton, we're coming for you. In the interest of sticking to the schedule, the armada only stayed overnight instead of sticking around for a 3-day party. The men had plenty of fun anyway. The entire island turned out to celebrate once the news of Arlong's fall spread. Those from Kakoyashi had a solemn moment of silence for Jen, Bellemere, and all those that hadn't lived to see this day, before shaking off the ghosts of the past and joining in the merrymaking. Nami had disappeared after having her tattoo altered by Dr. Nako. The core crew remembered this from last time and let her have her time to say goodbye, while the rest hardly noticed her absence in the chaos of the massive party. Between the Barades' per-planned feast and the seemingly infinite string of potluck dishes, Luffy got to eat his fill for the first time in what felt like forever. Usopp dazzled islanders and the crew alike with stories of the Grand Line. With Kaya an eager actress, and Gaiman and the animals colorful extras, Sanji got his fill of flirting, though he seemed more subdued than usual. Buggy, Django, and Jin all got into a drinking contest and then vanished for a few hours. When they reappeared, they were blushing, and had the look of those that had sworn a vow to never speak of something ever again. The next day, the ships were ready to go, already stocked, even if their crews were half dead from the hangovers and day-after aches. The islanders that were awake had gathered to see them off, and to say goodbye to Nami. Think she'll do the same thing as last time? Usopp asked as he lifted a crate of gunpowder from where some idiot had placed it. Nah, she'll never admit it, but we've rubbed off on her. She'll go for something more dramatic, Luffy mused. What was that about rubbing off on Nami Swan? Sanji asked dangerously. Dirty-minded candy cane fairy. Hissed Zoro through the open porthole. Don't make me kick your ass, Chia Pet. Kaya squinted, before opening her eyes wide. Oh my, I'm going to have to get used to this kind of thing or my nerves are going to be shot by Arabasta. Confused, everyone turned to see what she meant. The East Blue crews gaped in awe, while the Straw Hats could only chuckle and shake their heads. Nami had appeared over the clearing, standing on a puffy white cloud. Her climate act was assembled and held like a scepter, her hair flowing in the wind. As the islanders gaped below her, something began to fall from the cloud. Those beneath her gaped as they realized that coins, bills, and bits of jewelry were leaking out of the cloud. Nami looked forward, serene and unconcerned, as the wealth of the Konomi Islands was returned to its citizens. Her own cut was stashed on her person. Talk about making it rain, muttered Karn. I don't know whether to cry or scream at this sight, Buggy said hollowly. It's so beautiful, but she's just giving it away. That reminds me, if we come across a sky island, I need to tag along. It's been so long since I worked with those kind of ingredients, mused Zeph. Nami hopped off her cloud to land on the deck of the Going Merry. She turned to wave at the jubilant masses she left behind. So long. When Marines come to interview about me, only say nice things. Good luck. Najiko could only shake her head as she watched her little sister sail off with a veritable horde of pirates. Who'd have thought it? Bellemere-san, Jin-san. The day was sunny and clear, the waves a calm and constant music. Tadashi checked that his line wasn't knotted one last time, then made a textbook cast. He settled his rump on the bench of his raft, worn smooth from years of his wriggling, and got ready for a long wait. Sunday was a sacred ritual for him. Every week, since a time when he would have scoffed at the idea of having liver spots, he'd packed his little boat with fishing gear and set out with the dawn for some open water fishing. The actual rowing had taken more and more time as the years went by, but even now he still got a few hours with nothing but the waves, the fish, and his thoughts to keep him company. Tadashi eyed the float his beloved Yoko had made him. He grinned and turned an eye to the gold band on his hand. 60 years this June. He could hardly believe it. It felt like he'd just met her yesterday. She'd swept into his life like a cheerful tornado, throwing everything into shambles to make way for something new and wonderful he could never have imagined. She was the seaweed to his rice, the miso to his ramen, the only woman to ever beat him in at an arm wrestling contest. She'd kept him in line through belligerent taxmen, hurricanes, a food shortage, annoying neighbors, 3 rascally children, and 7 beautiful grandchildren. He took a deep breath and felt the salty air fill his lungs. He thought about how world nobles lived in Mariewa on the Red Line, higher than the clouds. There wasn't any salt on that air. He heard they carried special tanks of air to breathe whenever they came down to do business with the rest of the world. If that was true, they might not even know what the ocean smelled like. He snorted. Imagine, not even knowing what the ocean smelled like. There wasn't a man, woman, or child on this planet that hadn't caught at least a whiff of sea breeze on the air. The whole world was made up of islands, and yet, the only people that never had were the ones that made decisions for all the rest. Sure, he could sorta get the point of maintaining purity from the rest of the world. It was a pretty crazy place. Pirates and revolutionaries and marines, oh my. Maybe it was something about ocean air that made them so out of sorts. Then again, what position did those nobles have making decisions for a world they had never experienced? Oh, sure, they were descended from the kings that founded the world government, but that was how many years ago? Tadashi knew that things tended to run in families. Hikari was practically his clone, except for that extra X chromosome. Still, he'd be pretty surprised if he was anything like his great-great-great-grandpa. It wasn't just the blood. After all, they'd grown up in different worlds. But that was just the way things were done. It didn't make much sense if he thought too hard about it. But he wasn't about to join that upstart dragon and try to set up a democracy, or whatever the heck it was called. Thinking about politics always made his head hurt. Tadashi shook his head and refocused on something much more interesting. Pirates. He'd noticed about a month ago that things were starting to quiet down in his little corner of the world. First Iron Mace Alvida, then Buggy the Clown and 1-2 Django, now Don Creek. A bunch of big names had just disappeared from the headlines recently. They hadn't been captured by the Marines or bounty hunters, Tadashi knew. The Marines would have plastered their executions over the front page. They were so eager to show they were doing something ever since this age of pirates had started. Tadashi idly wondered if anything would really change if anyone actually managed to find One Piece. It wasn't like all the other pirates would just quit, and the Marines could hardly get more paranoid. What was the big deal, really? He was jerked out of his musings when he felt a twitch from his pole. He sat up, getting ready to pull, but apparently whatever fish it was thought his worm was unworthy of its palate. He sighed. He took off his hat to wipe his brow. It was pretty warm today. All the fish were probably further down, swimming in waters where they didn't feel like they were getting cooked. If he were younger, he'd wish for a squall. Fish always bit better when it was raining. But his stubby old arms couldn't face off against those kinds of waves like they used to. Still, the sun was pretty bright. As he took a sip from his canteen of grog, a secret pleasure, he figured he wouldn't mind a cloud right about now. WHOOHOO. Right, cowboy. Tadashi's head snapped to his left. He felt his brows creep up to what was left of his hairline. A cow the size of his house was swimming through the water a little ways away. On its back, whooping and hollering like savages, were what appeared to be young men dressed up early for Halloween. Apparently, they all liked clowns. He watched as one with eye-searing orange hair tugged on what looked like reins for the cow, which promptly turned hard to port. Tadashi thought he saw a flash of scales. Then the cow, its rider screaming in manic glee, seemed to pick up speed before diving into the ocean. Tadashi blinked. He looked down at his grog. He sniffed, but it didn't smell any stronger than usual. Still, he reeled in his line and picked up the oars. Apparently the sun was getting to him. Maybe it was time to call it quits on these weekly excursions. Unaware of the man they had unwittingly convinced of his own senescence, the group of buggy pirates held tight to each other as they finished off the underwater leg of the course. When Momo surfaced, they were back in view of the fleet. They shouted out encouragement to the aquatic mammal, trying to spur even more speed out of him. At last, they swerved into place beside the big top, soaking some of the spectators with an impromptu wave. "Time," called Mo, the man holding the reins. Usopp, official game master, examined the watch in his hands. 9 minutes, 28 seconds. The winning time. The buggy crew exploded into cheers as the Dawn and Black Cats moaned their defeat. Momo waited patiently for his nakama to disembark before paddling for the delicious smell of suckling pig coming from the barrady. All that sprinting had worked up his appetite. He happily munched the haunch given to him by the smiling cooks, feeling a sense of contentment deep down in his second stomach. These two legs were much nicer than Arlong. The race over, the crew settled down, trying to find a new way to distract themselves until 4 in the second training session of the day. Life had settled into a comfortable rhythm amongst the Armada in the week since their victory over Arlong. Wake up, train until you puke with Luffy, breakfast, drills with Nami, lunch, daily entertainment as arranged by Usopp, train until you pass out, wake up for dinner, then settle down and hope you didn't get night duty. They all knew that things wouldn't remain this constant for long. They were set to dock at Logtown tomorrow according to the infallible Nami-sama, and once they reached the Grand Line normalcy would be thrown out the window, as was warned by the Dawn Pirates. But they all savored this time, when things were simple and one could just bask in the joy of nakama. Usopp landed back on the Mary and retracted his hook. He'd perfected the design to his Usopp, making it so the hook actually detached at destination, plus a handy winch in case he needed different levels of slack. He glanced around the ship. Zoro was taking his daily constitutional, supervised by Usopp's awesome girlfriend. He seemed to be annoyed at the fact he had to hold her hand, but Usopp knew that Zoro knew better than to talk back to anything Kaya said. The swordsman looked remarkably well, considering he was playing ding-dong ditch with death just 2 weeks ago. The full-body bandages had finally come off, revealing that Zoro now had more scar tissue than normal skin. Once he'd confirmed with 2 mirrors that his back was untouched, the greenhead didn't seem to give 2 shits about his new downright frightening appearance. Once he got past the instinctive revulsion, Usopp had to admit that his nakama now looked pretty badass. Yes, it made his heart stop to see all those pockmarks and jagged lines on full display, and to know there were even more out of sight below the waist. But the fact Zoro was still alive after all that had clearly happened to him made him positively godlike in the eyes of Usopp and about 3/4 of the rest of the Armada. It bore mentioning that Zoro had not taken off his new hat since he'd been allowed to sit up. Nami had been quick to point out that it didn't match at all with his robes, but Zoro didn't care about fashion. That was Mihawk's hat. It was proof that Zoro had beaten him, that the greenhead was now the unofficial world's best. Short of burning it, there was no way any of them was going to get him to stop wearing it. While Usopp had been wool gathering, Kaya and Zoro had finished the walk. And that's it. Very good progress today, Zoro-san. You seem to have regained your full range of motion, and your stamina is up to acceptable levels. I'd wager you'll be fully recovered by this time next week. That mean I can train again? Zoro asked, visibly chomping at the bit. He'd tolerated all the babying when he'd been physically incapable of moving, but now that he could walk he seemed to think anything further was pointless. Kaya's eyes hardened. Oh, no it doesn't. I saw how crazy you get when you exercise at the Barady. I've invested serious time and energy in building your body back up to health. Like hell you're going to start tearing it back down again until I say so. You're not to do anything besides your rehab stretches, and if I catch wind you disobeyed doctor's orders, I'll confiscate those swords and throw them in the lockbox until we get to Arabasta. "To Zoro hissed, but he bowed his head regardless. Why had he thought it was nice to have her on the crew again? Kaya-sama, I've brought you an afternoon snack. Tardox poires, Sanji announced, appearing from thin air with a tray. Kaya smiled frostily. I do hope you made one for everyone else, Sanji-san. You know how I feel about preferential treatment. Sanji's skin turned an interesting shade of blue. Oh, of course, Kaya-sama. Perish the thought. I just brought you yours first because you looked the hungriest. That's all. Zoro hid his grin. Oh, yeah, that was why. Luffy appeared at Usopp's side. Usopp, thank you so much for getting a girlfriend. She makes Sanji make us food too. The sniper grinned. It was nothing really. When a grumbling Sanji handed them their own fancy snack, the two sat down to eat them. Hey, Luffy, something's been bothering me. Care to explain? Explain what? The captain asked, already halfway done. I thought you wanted to keep a low profile as long as possible. Why'd you brag like that to that creep Marine? Wouldn't letting the world know you're building an armada get a lot of bad attention a lot earlier than the others are ready for? Why'd you want a bounty so bad? Usopp asked. Luffy sighed. He put down the unfinished tart, which told Usopp that he was taking the question seriously. 2 reasons. 1, I really wanted to let the others in the Grand Line know we're back, and the only way I could think to reach them is the paper. I know how lonely I felt, not knowing for sure if I'd ever see my Nami or Chopper again, and I wanted them to know for sure. Usopp nodded. That made enough sense. But what's the other reason? Luffy's face suddenly twisted into an odd expression of utter horror, disbelief, and disgust. Usopp could only recall one time his captain had ever looked like that, when he discovered that Kokoro was a mermaid. If I hadn't said anything, the only thing that Marine would have known about was Nami beating Arlong. Can you imagine if she was the only one to get a bounty? If people thought she was the captain? Usopp applied his incredibly brilliant and devious mind to the concept. Look out. Lock up your purses. It's Nami, the infamous pirate captain of the Tangerine Pirates. Did you hear about that, Nami? Attack denies lobby. The Marines should really do something about that dangerous pirate lady. Empty the base. Notorious Captain Nami has been spotted. We must destroy this leader of evil. For justice. Usopp slowly turned his head to spy Nami on her lounge chair. Her eyes were closed, apparently just working on her tan. She seemed totally at peace. He imagined her hair flying about her in the heat of her anger, her eyes transforming into blood-red slits, her teeth sharp enough to bite off a man's head, her fists like wrecking balls, her voice like the howl of a hellish beast. He turned back to Luffy, identical expressions on their faces. That would be bad. Very, very, very bad. Luffy nodded solemnly. They both finished their snacks, the air quiet except for the sounds of nature and the buzz of conversation that's always present when a group reaches a certain size. Hey, Usopp. Yeah, Luffy. Can I talk to you about something that's been bothering me? Usopp looked at his friend. There was something off about his eyes. It took him a second before it hit him. Luffy looked troubled. Luffy never looked troubled. Happy, definitely. Hungry, almost constantly. Angry, annoyed, intent, sad. Luffy was an open book when it came to his emotions. But Usopp had never seen that little furrow between his eyebrows or the almost guilty frown. What is it, Luffy? The teen sighed. Krieg. Usopp tilted his head. What about him? Usopp's nonchalance seemed to make Luffy feel even worse. I killed him. Yeah, so, he was a pretty nasty guy. And his bounty probably paid for Zoro's survival and it let Jin become captain so he could join you. I don't see anything bad that came out of it, Usopp listed. Luffy shook his head. You don't get it. Usopp, I've never killed someone before. I mean, he amended. I'm not saying no one's ever died after I fought them. I'm pretty sure there's at least a few guys I hit a bit too hard at Marineford or Punk Hazard. And there were times when I was mad enough to want to kill a few of the guys we fought. But it almost doesn't count then, you know. I mean, I'm not saying their lives don't mean anything, but it was a fight, you know, me against them, so it's fair. I don't know. What I'm trying to say is, you've never done it on purpose, Usopp realized. You've never done it cold. Luffy shook his head, his eyes a million miles away. What if the ambush was too much? What if something's wrong in my head now? What if I'm turning into exactly the kind of guy I used to beat up? Usopp sighed. Look, first off, I'm probably not the best person to talk to about this. You'd be better off with Zoro or Sanji. Then again, maybe you should hear this from someone that won't treat it casually. Zoro'd probably just go that's how it works or something. Exactly. Usopp considered his words with care. Geez, maybe they should look into recruiting a shrink. He was no more qualified to patch up Luffy's psyche than he'd been to patch up Mary. Between Brook's questionable state after returning to essentially solitary confinement and the fact he was 99% sure the whole armada was going to fight in the war at Marineford, they could certainly use one. Let's start simple. When did this start? You seemed totally calm when you were actually doing it. Luffy took a deep breath. It started that night. I had a nightmare. I kept seeing his eyes. That moment the light left them. I don't think it really hit me, what I'd done, until the moment I woke up. And how did that make you feel? Usopp asked, feeling like he should have a clipboard or something. See, that's the thing. I didn't feel anything. That's what keeps getting to me. Krieg's dead. I did that. A whole life just cut off, because of me. Shouldn't I be torn up inside? Feel guilty, bad, something? What kind of person isn't bothered by the fact they killed someone? Luffy looked to Usopp, seeming desperate for guidance. I am so out of my depth here, Usopp mentally bewailed. Let's take a step back, shall we? Tell me what you were thinking that day at the Barrady. What was going through your head? Luffy huffed. I was thinking that Mihawk was coming and we didn't have time for him to have his little hissy fit. I was thinking that I needed to do something big and dramatic to impress Jin and Zeph so they'd join. I was thinking that it would be too much trouble to keep him prisoner. Those seem like some pretty legitimate reasons, Usopp said, trying to sound objective. Yeah, but is there really ever a good enough reason to just kill someone? It's okay as long as it helps your own goals. If it's all that arbitrary, then the only difference between me and Akainu is what side we're on. Usopp felt a light bulb go off over his head. That's the real issue here. Weren't you the one that said yourself that you're not a hero? You didn't beat up Crocodile because he was going to kill a bunch of people, because it was the right thing. You did it because if you didn't, Vivi would be sad. That was enough for you, wasn't it? Yeah, Luffy muttered. Suddenly he hung his head. I hate my Gramps. If he hadn't made me do all this thinking, he said the word like it was a reprehensible activity, then I'd still be blissfully ignorant and not care about any of this stuff. The only thing on my mind would be if I'm fast enough to actually sneak a tangerine from that bush now. Usopp couldn't help but laugh at that. But then he sobered up and tried to look as serious as possible, tilting Luffy's head up to look him in the eye. Look, Luffy, if you're asking me if you're turning into a guy like Rob Lucci, my answer would be hell no, and I'd ask you if you'd eaten anything questionable. Luffy's mouth quirked up a little. But if you're asking if you're becoming a harder person, we all have. Usopp cocked a thumb at the still lounging Nami. Could you have imagined the Nami you first met ever kicking Arlong's ass in a million years? You can't go through complete and utter defeat like we have twice now and still be rainbows and smiles. All you need to know is that Krieg's death ultimately made things easier for your nakama. Leave all the debate over ethics to people that have nothing better to do. And if you ever get in a situation with an enemy where you have to choose between us and them, is that even really a choice? Luffy shook his head. Of course not. Then he grinned that giant grin that brought back so many memories. Thanks for that, Usopp. You always know just what to do, so I hereby name you second mate. Usopp grinned back. Cool. Do I get a pay raise? Luffy snorted. No, but if ever there's a time when me or Zoro aren't around and a big decision has to be made, you get to be captain and make the call. You serious? Usopp asked, his eyes extending past his nose. Yep, so, think you can stop introducing yourself as Captain Usopp. That really cramps my style. Usopp stood up proud. Who do you think I am? There's no way I'd claim to be something so low as a mere captain. I am Usopp, second mate of the legendary Straw Hat Armada, revered around the entire world. You know it, Luffy shouted. The two then broke into an improvised musical about the many epic adventures of the world-famous pirates and the notorious Shah. Nami cracked open an eye. Learn to keep your voices down when having secret discussions? Idiots. She'd been listening the whole time. Nami noticed the news coup approaching and sat up. It landed on the railing and promptly saluted. Nami popped her usual 100 berry coin into the little purse and took one of the papers from its satchel. She started to turn around when it gave a little cough. She rose a brow when it tapped the coin slot with a feather. A price raise. Why does that ring a bell? When the bird made a little noise again, her eyes narrowed. You'll take what I give you and you'll like it, she said in the tone she used with the monster trio. Suitably terrified, the poor bird flew off while Nami adjusted her chair so she could read. It's odd how nostalgic I feel when I read these things, she muttered to herself. There was a coup in Villa. Didn't Norland dock there? I could swear he wrote that in his journal. Nami trailed off as she turned the page and not one, not two, but 5 flyers fell out of the paper to land face up on the deck. Nami looked at the flyers, eyes wide. Well, one in particular. Then she turned back to the paper to find a full-page article. She skimmed it, her eyes pausing when she found a particular sentence. Luffy, I'm going to kill you, she roared, as she watched her captain turn to see what he'd done that time. A very small corner of her mind conceded then again, it could have been a lot worse. He and Usopp have no idea how big an understatement they were making when they said it would be bad. The day before, in Marineford, the bounty committee was a collection of some of the most decorated officers in the Marine. Those that had real experience with combating pirates and other forms of evil, but had through one reason or another been delegated to administrative duties. It was they whom assessed the never-ending stream of threat reports brought in by the information branch and decided how much of the world government's budget they would offer up to incentivize third parties and warn the general public. They had heard it all before, and it took a great deal to faze even one of them. The whole group gaped at Lieutenant Commander Branu in abject horror. Could you repeat that? One of the oldest asked. Branu sighed. I said, gentlemen, that we have a rogue admiral on our hands. Or perhaps I should say that a man that could have well become an admiral has been confirmed as an enemy of justice. Explain, Lieutenant Commander, barked the most cunning. Branu turned to the board behind him. There was various names on it, all connected by different colors of chalk. He indicated the one at the top. Monkey D. Luffy, the grandson of our own Vice Admiral Garp. Fleet Admiral Sengoku reports that the Vice Admiral requested special permission to train the boy on his home island 2 years ago. The boy had apparently expressed interest in becoming, quote, as awesome as my Gramps. Garp evidently saw this as a desire to join the Marines once he was older, and Sengoku granted the request for extended leave after Garp's repeated assurances. The boy's evil was strong even then, it seems, fooling his grandfather into unwittingly aiding his ascent to power. Garp sent in several glowing reports during his leave, and even accounting for familial bias, the Fleet Admiral himself agrees that the boy has real potential. Garp returned to base 7 months ago under the impression that he would return to pick up his enlisted grandson for an apprenticeship any day now. Clearly, he will be disappointed. What has the boy done? Asked the swiftest. He first appeared a month ago, when he appeared from nowhere to defeat Captain Axe-Hand Morgan and inflict significant property damages. He did not reveal his full name at the time, and the report provoked no real response. He then vanished for weeks. It was not until 5 days ago when Captain Nezumi reported that we learned what nefarious deeds he'd been up to. Branu indicated the other 4 names one by one. The boy is building a pirate armada. Buggy the Clown, 15 million. and 1-2 Django, 9 million, though we recommend his price be raised to that of his former captain, Kuro of 1,000 plans, 16 million. Furthermore, he defeated Don Krieg, 17 million, with what was confirmed as a Shigan at autopsy, and convinced his number 2 man, Devilman Jin, to become captain and join as well. For this reason, Jin shall inherit his former captain's bounty. As for his personal crew, we have limited information, but Luffy seems to have found at least one very dangerous individual. His navigator, a woman called Nami, seems to have defeated Sawtooth Arlong, 20 million, with lightning. Whether through a devil fruit ability or some kind of weapon, we don't know. It seems appropriate that she have a bounty at least as great as the man she defeated, so we propose 20 million. As you can all see, Luffy is not only dangerous but charismatic, which is its own threat. Have we any information to go on besides Nezumi's report? Asked the wisest. Branu seemed to bite his tongue. Given the extraordinary nature of his report, we felt it prudent to follow up on it. Thus, Fleet Admiral Sengoku approved the use of the secret coup service. There were a few suppressed guffaws throughout the room. The secret coup service was something of a joke amongst the Marine elite. There had been a great buzz of excitement when Dr. Vegapunk has announced a design for a long-range surveillance device that could be mounted to train seagulls. Thoughts of unlimited reconnaissance capabilities had made some of those assigned to such targets as Dragon and Red Hair Shanks practically jump for joy. They had been greatly disappointed when repeated field testing revealed that the rigs were simply too delicate for use in the turbulent climates of the Grand Line. A stiff breeze could knock them off calibration. The whole thing was looked on as a very expensive embarrassment by the majority of the Marines in the know. However, there were those, among them Sengoku, that insisted that they could still prove useful and frequently approved them for jobs in the blues. And even then you could only count on reliable images on a calm day. Branu got back in his stride. Several high-resolution images were attained. In fact, we will be using enhanced cuts for the new bounty posters. He grabbed a stack of photos from a file on his person and began passing them out. Luffy himself seems to have chosen a caravel, and we estimate his crew to be no more than 7 in number. Evidently, when it comes to his personal gang, he prefers quality over quantity. As you can see, Buggy's ship the Big Top and Django's ship the Black Bezin are sailing behind him in a triangle formation. Jin and a small portion of his crew seem to be sharing space on the Big Top, given Krieg's recent attempt to enter the Grand Line. We can assume the rest were lost to the freak whether near Reverse Mountain or the Sea Kings in the Calm Belt during their escape. The ship they are surrounding has been confirmed as the Barady, a floating restaurant very popular in the East Blue. Given the shady reputation of the staff and owner, we cannot tell whether they are being held hostage or are colluding willingly. But as you can see, these images clearly confirm Nezumi's report. What shall we do? Asked the most powerful of them all. This cannot be simply swept under the rug. Nezumi seems to have already made arrangements with the News Coup branch. Apparently, Luffy had some requests about the newspaper article he anticipated about himself, and the captain followed through under fear of retaliation. Also, given that Vice Admiral Garp has already embarked for the East Blue and will undoubtedly be very angry on learning of his grandson's betrayal, there's a possibility this whole business will be handled before it really starts. However, we cannot depend on that. The final report on Luffy's training indicated he had the raw power of a Vice Admiral. And if this was all a plot to gain power, we cannot be sure he didn't keep some things hidden from his grandfather. All that being said, Fleet Admiral Sengoku has recommended a level of discretion. We do not want the public panicking about there being a second Whitebeard or some such nonsense. Branu slapped a poster onto the board behind him. There has never been a 9-figure starting bounty in the history of the Marines. That shall remain true. But in light of the very significant threat he poses, Fleet Admiral Sengoku himself advises an amount of no less than Kaya Ojousama. The staff of the mansion all jumped at the wail of despair that pierced every corner of the expansive house. There was a veritable stampede as all the maids, servants, and bodyguards rushed to the office of their new master and former peer, Mary-sama. What is it? Asked the first man to cross the door, his eyes sweeping the room, looking for threats to his employer. Kaya Ojousama, moaned the man with fluffy hair, seemingly crying over some piece of paper on his desk. The oldest of the maids, a rather plump woman by the name of Molly Potts, stepped forward to lay a hand on her master's shoulder. There, dear. What seems to be the problem? Did you find an old letter of her ladyship's? You really need to learn to let her go. A nice cup o' tea should do you right. That's not it, Mary protested wetly. And enough with the tea. I've had more tea in the past 3 weeks than I've had in 3 years. Mrs. Potts didn't seem to like that. In her mind, the answer to all problems was tea. Her husband, the cook, saw the warning signs of his wife's infamous temper and rushed to do damage control. Why don't we wait until he's calmed down a little and then ask him, dear? Kaguzuwasu, the new head butler with the recent retirement of Clahador and ascension of Mary, gave an imperious sniff and seemed to glide to his master's side, offering a perfectly pressed handkerchief. Mary seized the pristine cloth and proceeded to repeatedly defile it with various bodily fluids. Kaguzuwato gave no outward reaction to the destruction of his hanky. It took 15 minutes, but Mary finally stopped being a sniveling wreck and had evolved into a broken man. Oh, Kaya Ajasama, dear Kaya, how will we ever recover from this? What seems to be the problem, monsieur? Questioned Rimuru, the newest employee from a far-off village with a peculiar accent. This is the problem, Mary exclaimed, slapping a hand on the piece of paper on his desk. Kaguzuwasu adjusted his pince-nez and peered forward. Wanted dead or alive. 1-2 Django, 16 million buri. Pardon me, master, but I fail to see how this has anything to do with our former ladyship. Are you mocking me? Can't you see it? Confused, and hoping to find what was causing their lord such distress, all the staff leaned closer to the desk to examine the poster. The picture was of a man, perhaps in his late 30s, wearing heart-shaped sunglasses and some sort of false beard. The picture was taken at an angle, showing him in profile, with the ocean and a couple ships in the left half of the picture. It was Pot's son Chip, with his young eyes that spotted it. You, Mama, why are that boy and girl kissing like that? What are you talking about, Chip? His mother asked, unable to see anything like a kiss in the picture. There, Mama, there, the boy cried, pointing to the extreme left of the picture. Ever handy, Kaguzuwato procured a magnifying glass and held it over the spot in question. Details suddenly burst into focus, revealing what appeared to be a rather amorous embrace between a young man and woman, she arching up into him as he bent over her. Her foot was even popped. The clarity was offset by the cheap quality of the paper and ink. But they all would recognize that nose and those blonde tresses anywhere. Oh, how romantic. Kaya-chan and Usopp-kun look so good together, don't they? Gushed Fifi, the other maid, clutching her feather duster to her chest like it was a bouquet of roses. Everyone knew how big a romantic she was, what with her personal library of romances that outsized the manor's actual library. She'd met her match in Rimuru, who was such an unabashed flirt that he'd even made a move on Mrs. Potts, whom had good-naturedly laughed it off. It's a disaster, Mary shouted, shocking Fifi out of her daze. The whole world can see Kaya Ajasama in such a shameful position. Oh, Kaya Ajasama, how will I ever look your father in the eye in the afterlife? You have to lighten up, monsieur. The girl is in love, there is no shame in that. Besides, no one can even see her, Rimuru consoled. Mary didn't seem to hear, his head resting on the desk and a visible cloud of depression hanging over him. Kaguzuwasu rolled his eyes before giving an official hem-hem. I think we can conclude that our master is no real danger. Everyone, return to your posts. Out in the forest, a trio of boys was also examining Django's poster. The captain is doing well. We are very happy for him, they said. They turned to the only other inhabitant of the clearing, another young boy tied to a stump with several lengths of rope. He seemed very freaked out. I told you freaks, I don't want to join your stupid club. Let me go, damn it. The three former members of the Usopp pirates merely grinned. Resistance is futile. You will be assimilated. Kobe could hardly believe he was where he was. How had the crazy dance called life led him to this moment? Of course, he knew the answer to that question, and it wore a straw hat. The day before, he'd been going about his usual duties as a chore boy. He'd presented the letter Luffy had given him to Commander Ripper the day after Morgan had been defeated. The man seemed very skeptical at first, glancing between the signature of one of the biggest names in the Marine Navy and the shrimp that was trying and failing to hide his trembling. However, after Kobe's heartfelt declaration that he wanted to be a Marine when questioned, Ripper decided to let it slide. Still, he remained skeptical that Garp would show up, so much so that he didn't even bother troubling the man with a call to confirm the letter's authenticity. He'd let Kobe join morning PT, but otherwise the boy was just another chore boy. Kobe didn't mind being stuck on the bottommost rung of the military. Even chore boys had their place in the grand scheme of things, and he performed all the menial work with a smile and sense of pride. His enthusiasm for what many considered to be drudgery had led many of the other Marines to question the boy's sanity. Kobe's extraordinary work ethic had initially been taken as a personal insult by fellow chore boy Helmeppo, the son of the disgraced former captain. The spoiled brat constantly whined that Kobe's can-do attitude only encouraged the higher-ups to give them even more work, which was as bad as murder in the eyes of a boy who until recently had never had to lift a finger. Kobe had endured this for a week before he'd confronted Helmeppo, privately drawing courage from the example of Luffy and his two friends. Helmeppo-san, you wish to return to the life you knew? Yes. Helmeppo blinked before sneering. Of course, idiot. And Helmeppo-san is a Marine? Yes. He huffed. Not by choice, but yeah. I'm stuck at this to make up for Dad's crimes, so-called. Then the only way for Helmeppo-san to get back the privileges he is used to is to become a Marine officer. And the only way for Helmeppo-san to become an officer to get promoted. And the only way for Helmeppo-san to get promoted is by working hard? Yes. Kobe had subtly been getting closer until he was practically nose to nose, the better to deliver his message. Helmeppo looked away and scratched his head. Finally, though, he was able to face Kobe. Well, yeah, when you put it like that, I guess that's true. Kobe's stern expression gave way to a wide smile. Then Helmeppo-san should not complain about doing work. After all, you have to work in order to not work. Helmeppo-san should not mind a little friendly competition. Friendly competition? Helmeppo asked. Kobe quirked his mouth. We're friends, aren't we? So we should help push each other to be the best we can be. So we should compete to see who gets promoted through hard work first? Yes. Helmeppo stared blankly for a moment before breaking into a snide grin and rolling up his sleeves. Step aside then, chore boy. I'm going to blow past you so fast it'll make your head spin. Kobe had only smiled in response. Since then, the two had become the most productive chore boys the East Blue had ever seen. Life at the base had never been so efficient. Ripper had watched the two's contests from a distance and felt a sense of pride for the next generation of Marines. Though he still didn't believe Garp the Fist himself would show up. How wrong he was. It was with a sense of panicked disbelief that Ripper watched the dog-themed ship sail into the harbor and find the massive veteran himself towering over him in his office. You in charge here? The man barked around a cigar. Why yes, Vice Admiral. Well, what are you waiting for? Go get Luffy, and any little friends he's made by now. Luffy, sir? Ripper asked timidly. The boy with the letter? Man, get a grip. I'm a superior, not a snake. Ripper was pretty sure the boy's name was Kobe, not Luffy, but he picked up the intercom speaker anyway and stated, will the chore boys please report to my office? Right away. That is all. Garp raised a brow. Chore boy, huh? I said to start him with the basics, but I figured you'd at least have started him as a petty officer. Didn't you see him? Ripper held his tongue. Either Garp was actually as senile as all the rumors said, in which case Ripper didn't want to do anything to provoke him, or there was a massive misunderstanding, and in that case he didn't want to commit to anything until he knew who to duck. Shortly, Kobe and Helmeppo had filed into the office, apparently straight from dishwashing. Garp turned, a smile about to break out on his weathered face, before he paused. A confused wrinkle formed over his brow. Then, settling on annoyance, he turned back to Ripper. Luffy's not here. I told you to send for the boy that brought the letter. Ripper gulped. This is the boy who brought the letter, he said, indicating a slightly shaking hand at Kobe. The other is his friend. Just as you asked, sir. Garp took a couple deep drags on his cigar. After a tense minute, in which time Kobe seemed to sweat half his body weight, Garp turned his eye on Kobe. Explain, he barked, his aura playing jump rope with the line between rational calm and hair-trigger rage. Kobe seemed in trouble of losing control of his bowels. Still, he took a breath and answered. Hello, Luffy-san gave me the letter, sir. We met and Luffy-san became my friend. I told him my only dream was to become a Marine. He just handed it to me and went on his way, sir, I swear. He carefully left out any mention of Luffy being a pirate. Some sixth sense based on self-preservation perhaps, told him that it would be exactly the wrong thing to say in this situation. Garp's eyes became shadowed. The tension in the room was thick enough to scoop up and drink as soup. It tasted of peas. Ripper felt like he was waiting for a bomb to go off. Kobe's life looked to be flashing past his eyes. Helmeppo just looked confused. Then Garp threw back his head and laughed loud enough to hurt. Biwahahaha. This is just like you, cheeky brat. The other three visibly relaxed. When Garp wound down from his laughing fit, he turned an assessing eye on the two chore boys. He seemed to pay particular attention to their eyes. You two don't seem like total wimps. Guess I might as well take you 2 on 2. Come along, keep up. And that was how Kobe found himself to be on the ship of Vice Admiral Garp, en route to Logtown before returning to Marine HQ. I just want to thank you again for this, Garp-san, Kobe spoke up, from his position behind the man at the railing. Don't worry about it, brat. Luffy clearly saw something in you. Besides, there's nothing more challenging than a hopeless case. Thanks, Kobe gulped. So, you're sure we'll find Luffy-san in Logtown? Of course, if he didn't join up at Shelltown, he definitely went to Logtown. I hear good things about the captain there. He probably thought he'd work his way up the old-fashioned way, as if I'd let him out of my sight. Such a troublesome grandson, he is. Why yes, Kobe muttered, feeling a chill run down his spine. It was clear that Garp had no idea about what his grandson was really up to. And Kobe was not looking forward to the moment he figured out. He saw how big that ball and chain was in the hold. He didn't want to be in the same time zone as a man that could swing that around when he got a nasty shock. An officer ran up to them, clutching a few flyers. Vice Admiral, new bounties from HQ. I think you'll want to see this. Garp raised a brow as he took the pile. Not noticing Kobe turned pale as a ghost. Why would they bother me with these small fries? You still getting back at me, Sengoku? Stingy bastard. Garp froze when he actually saw the poster on top. He blinked, rubbed his eyes, and peered closer at the poster staring back at him. On instinct, Kobe covered his ears. It probably saved his eardrums. What the damn hell? If a stranger were to walk into Fuchsia Village, they might well think some local festival was taking place. People were gathering in the streets, talking animatedly about some event, and the general atmosphere was one of celebration. When said hypothetical stranger learned it was all in support of a pirate, they'd quietly edge away before running for the hills. Look, can you believe? That son of a gun really did it. Luffy's a wanted man. Conversations like this were the only kind in town that day. Geez, can you believe this? One guy asked his buddies. I knew he was crazy strong and he said he was going to do big things, but this is something else. Whoever heard of a pirate recruiting other pirates? Out on the Grand Line, a rather ugly and fat silver-tongued coward was overcome by a sudden bout of hay fever. Hey, maybe we'll get famous, another dude said. This is the highest starting bounty in history. People could come from all over to see where he came from, where he grew up. We might get tourists. This is the most exciting thing that ever happened to this place, shouted an exuberant woman. Shut up, all of you. The street hushed. The crowd parted around the positively steaming form of their elderly mayor, Whoop Slap, in casual clothing and hobbling along with his cane. He was about as intimidating as a baby sloth. But still, there was something in his eye that made all the revelers feel like children caught with their hands in the cookie jar. Honestly, what's wrong with this town? This is a bad thing. An infamous criminal has been linked with our name. Damn that Luffy, he shamed the whole village. I should have brained the bastard when he broke my house like I wanted to. Whoop Slap kept on grumbling as he made his way into the bar. Apparently, his shout hadn't penetrated the din, so no one was suitably cowed. A toast to the most fearsome pirate in the East Blue. Our own Luffy, roared a flushed farmer. Kanpai, came the ear-shattering reply. Whoop Slap huffed as he made his way to the nearest stool, where he was swiftly attended to by Makino, the owner of the establishment and something of a big sister figure to Luffy. Damn brats. I don't know why they're so proud of this. That destructive brat went and did it. You can't hold it against them, Mayor. They're just happy that Luffy's doing well. The greenhead cast her eye to one of a dozen posters laying on her bar, left by her customers. Luffy was staring straight into the camera, which seemed odd since it had clearly been taken from far off. A hard, mocking smile showed off his teeth, and his eyes seemed to shout bring it to anyone that looked at him. As always, he had his hat on, held to his head by a hand. Her eyes drifted to the other posters of his accomplices. He certainly seems to have surrounded himself with lots of interesting people. With the gang he's putting together, maybe his dream isn't so far out of reach after all. His dream, muttered Whoop Slap, looking into his glass pensively, or his destiny. Up the mountain, the Dadden family were treated to the sight of their beloved leader having what appeared to be a complete psychotic breakdown. She was on her back, her legs running faster than a hamster on crack, pounding the ground with her fists, tears streaming down her face, with her face red as a tomato. What made this scene comical rather than demented was the fact she was laughing so hard you could hear it from Grey Terminal. How long is she going to keep this up? Muttered a lowly henchman, looking up from his grinding wheel. It's already been 10 minutes. She's going to pop an artery at this rate, fussed Magra. She'll wind down soon. Cut her some slack. She's been looking forward to this since before Garp moved in. Advice given, Dogger got back to the never-ending task of sweeping. Oh, my ribs, roared Dadden, catching her fifth wind as she again looked at the flyer clutched in her hand. Garp is going to shit a sideways brick when he sees this. I take back everything I ever said about you, Luffy. You magnificent bastard, you. The men all sighed. Maybe handling all those coca leaves was starting to mess with their boss's head. With a roll of his eyes, random goon number Q thought aloud, wonder how Ace is going to take this. The Moby Dick was the proud flagship of the Whitebeard Pirates, a massive construct that plowed through the otherworldly weather of the New World with all the gentle, overwhelming power of its namesake. Her sturdiness was unneeded at the moment, the water calm as a puddle and the wind barely a breeze. Granted, that was because it was near the edge of the calm belt, but the point was that the crew, or rather family aboard, felt free to relax. Marco, 1st Division Commander and General 2nd in Command, took the chance to spread his wings, literally. He flew in the air over the mighty ship in the form of the legendary Phoenix, the power gifted to him by his devil's fruit. As he banked on a thermal, his eye fell on the ship and a deep sense of peace suffused his soul. There are no words for how good it felt to be riding the wind, knowing his flock was safe and sound. Life with the Whitebeard Pirates was 10 kinds of crazy, but he wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. He spotted a news coup coming and quickly dived. For some reason, seagulls weren't comfortable around fellow aviaries made of living flame 10 times their size. They were lucky if one of the blasted birds found them once a week, so Marco decided to cut his flight short. With the thoughtless ease born of long practice, Marco shifted back into his human form the second he got near the deck, walking off his momentum as easily as stepping off a treadmill. maneuvering around the lounging forms of his brothers. Marco walked up to the news outlet and fed spare change into its pouch until it allowed him to take a paper. His brow raised at how many new bounty posters fell out. That was unusual. The other brow joined its brother as he read the article about the rookies in question. This could prove entertaining. Hey, Ace, I got a question for you, yoy. Hey, what is it, Marco? Marco concealed a roll of his eye when he saw his fellow commander sit up from his obvious sunbathing. Ever since he'd eaten his fruit, the boy had been impossible. Now that he never had to worry about temperature ever again, he seemed determined to spend the rest of his life half naked. Their sisters certainly seemed to appreciate the decision, which only served to inflate the fireman's ego to an annoying degree. What was the name of that kid brother of yours again? Marco asked. All the crew in earshot groaned in unison. Why'd you have to bring him up? Once you get him started on the kid, he never shuts up, complained one of the older vets. Ace didn't seem to hear, a nostalgic grin spreading involuntarily across his face. Luffy, Monkey D. Luffy, big crybaby, doesn't know what 2 + 2 is, totally helpless in a fight, can't walk down the road without getting into trouble. But there's something about him that makes it so you can't help but love him. He's probably set out by now, shouting how he'll become Pirate King at the top of his lungs every other minute. I'm scared as hell about him actually being on the Grand Line. But he's got to live his own life and I have to let him. Ace sighed. Yep, that's my little brother. He cocked his head. Why'd you ask? Marco shrugged, hiding a shit-eating grin. Oh, this was going to be good. Oh, no reason. I'm just looking at his record-breaking bounty poster. That's all. Wait, what? Blurted Ace, snatching the poster from Marco's hand. He straightened it out and took a good look at it. He blinked. He rubbed his eyes. He blinked some more. He took a breath. What the actual fuck, Luffy? Those and sundry laid out on the deck jumped as a miniature explosion seemed to take place. They all turned to see Ace literally steaming, flickers of flame racing over his skin as he breathed heavily, clutching a now charred poster. Marco sipped the fumes of his brother's outraged surprise like they were a fine cognac. You seem a tad tense, yoy, he remarked dryly. Of course I'm fucking tense. My little brother has the biggest rookie bounty in the history of the world. How the bloody blue fuck did this happen? When I left he could barely throw a punch straight and now he's practically a supernova after, what, 1 fucking month? How the motherfucking hell did this happen? Ace's rant climaxed with another blast of uncontrolled flame. Man, I forgot how big a potty mouth Ace is when he gets in a bad mood, muttered Jazu. Not really the point, man, sweat dropped the guy next to him. Marco wiggled the hand holding the paper. Well, there's an article in here about him. A whole page, too, yoy. I'd offer it to you, but I'm afraid you might burn it. You'd have to be blind, deaf, and dumb to miss the teasing sarcasm. Give me the goddamn paper, Marco. Marco held up his hands in a don't shoot the messenger gesture as the mass of paper and ink was torn out of his hands. Ace raced through the article, muttering like a madman as his face got more and more pale the further he got in. A new and frightening evil has emerged on the seas. Blah blah blah. Slander and calumny first appeared with the cruel and unwarranted assault of respected Marine Captain Morgan. Hey, I remember that guy. Total dick. So I guess that's understandable if he did something to piss Lou off. Abused family connections to steal Marine secrets, what the fuck? Don't tell me he actually tricked Gramps into training him. Gramps is going to chew him up, shit him out, and pound him flat for a start if that's what he did. Seduce and conquer his rivals into submission. What? That doesn't sound like Luffy at all. He beats up first and asks questions never. He doesn't recruit. To the monster doctor. What the hell? Were you high or something, Lou? Measures will be swiftly taken. Shit, that doesn't sound good. Got him at all the hell. Luffy, what the fuck are you thinking? They're a problem, son. Ace jumped, turning to see the man that he'd devoted his life to. Edward Newgate was an intimidating figure, an example of the diluted giant blood common on the Grand Line, standing over twice as tall as most of his sons. Though his skin was wrinkled, it was pulled so taut over solid, powerful muscle you could bounce a coin off his abs. His unmistakable mustache bristled as he frowned down at Ace. He seemed deaf to the calls of the 3 nurses in pink ineffectively admonishing him. Pops, you shouldn't be standing. Yonko rolled his eyes. Kirurara, I'm not made of glass. I can walk if I want to. And I was worried. You haven't had a flare-up since the first week you had your gift. What's wrong, son? Ace shook his head. My idiot little brother, that's what, he grumbled. Oh, the brat with Shanks's hat. What's he done to get you so worked up? Without a word, Ace handed the crispy poster over to his father. Whitebeard squinted before raising a brow. This is the weak little brother you're always talking about. Doesn't seem so weak. His bounty's more than twice what yours was, Gururara. Ace blushed. I swear, he was totally helpless when I left 3 years ago. Sure, keep telling yourself that, yoy. Shut up, feather brain. Still, what the brat do? East Blue is the last place I'd expect a price like this to pop up, Whitebeard mused. If I didn't know any better, I'd say he knew I'd joined you and is trying to show me up. He somehow got all the big names in East Blue to join him. I always figured him for a small crew, tiny even, and now it's like he's building an army. They say imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. Haruta commented. Whitebeard hid a little smirk. So this is what you meant, you red-hair brat. Bet on the next generation indeed. On an unremarkable spring island in paradise, one of the most feared pirates in the world had set up base. The grunts of his crew were well known, feared pirates in the blues. The officers on a level that barely qualified as human. The man himself would give all three admirals pause. Yet he'd been laid low by one of the oldest and simplest vices known to man. Someone turn off the sun. I hate hangovers, moaned the one-armed emperor. Ben Beckman released a thin stream of smoke from his lungs. It's your own fault for forgetting to drink some water last night. But water's got no alcohol. The 40-something sounded like a toddler. That's kinda the point. Captain, mumbled Lucky Roo around his usual mouthful of meat. Yasop sighed. I spy with my little eye. No fair, Yasop-san. No one can beat you. You always pick something none of us can see. Whined one of the newer recruits. The dreadlocked man grinned. I was going to say the news coup. Turn out your pockets and look for change, boys. Some of the coins handed over had green stuff on them, but eventually they managed to get the news coup to part with its cargo. Ben glanced at the headlines and opened to examine the full articles that caught his attention. He barely noticed the slips of paper that fell out of the folds. New bounties. Ready the dartboard, gentlemen, called one of Yasop's underlings. Lucky Roo's eyes widened. Wait a minute. What? Asked the guy who picked up the poster on top. Captain, doesn't that look like? Began the portly glutton. It is, interrupted Ben, unfazed as usual. He has a whole page right here. Looks like Captain's hunch was right. What are you guys talking about? Grumbled Shanks, turning his bloodshot eyes to the piece of paper causing so much fuss. They just about popped out of his skull when the photo came into focus. A slow grin spread across the man's face. Boys, break out the casks. We're having a party. But you were just complaining about your hangover, protested one of the mooks. Irrelevant. We can't let an event like this go by without a celebration. We go hard tonight, boys. It's not even the afternoon, muttered one of the most heavily affected from last night. Shanks merely turned his head towards the east. So, let's see what you can do. Luffy. The armada was a mess. Each ship was its own self-contained explosion as each crew gaped at the bounties. Why'd they even issue mine if I'm not getting a price bump? Am I just some footnote to those tools? Raved Buggy. Well, I don't look weird, mused Django. My own bounty. Kind of get how this went to Krieg's head. This is a strange ego boost to seeing this, reflected Jin. 20 million. That's even bigger than it was last time. And what the hell kind of nickname is Lightning Thief? That's not nearly as cute as Cat Burglar. People will think I'm actually dangerous now. That means they'll want to fight me. Which means I have to fight now. Which means I have to kill you, Luffy. You're the one that wanted to beat Arlong. You earned every brie of that, Nami. Luffy was too distracted to properly fear for his life. He couldn't stop the childish grin on his face. This looks much cooler than the last one, he mused. And for some reason I find the number incredibly funny. Wanted, dead or alive. Monkey D. Straw Hat OUFFY. 99 million buri. Okay, sadly the chapter is over. And if you enjoyed the video, just leave a like. And subscribe with post notification. So when the next chapter is ready, you will be notified. Okay, see you in the next video. Bye.